Chapter 470. It was still raining in Eastern Europe. The rain, which had lasted for several days and nights, raged through the whole city with the wind. The rain was overwhelming, messy, dense, and blank and desolate. There was no clear change of seasons in Eastern Europe. The cool summer had passed, the rainy season was over, and the whole of Eastern Europe was about to enter the cold winter. Therefore, the atmosphere of the whole Wulan state seemed to become depressed and cold with the cold wind and rain. The great change of the Rekvia family directly tilted the position of the whole Wulan state to Zhongzhou state unconditionally. For several days, Prime Minister Riker, who was temporarily the president of Wulan state, had issued rigorous, sincere, and apologetic apologies to Zhongzhou state, and severely condemned the despicable and insidious Jiang family of South America. All the statements were distributed through the diplomatic department of Wulan state. They not only resounded throughout the country but also announced to the world. With Wulan state's clear statement, Oga state and Ras state also announced that the previous dispute was all a misunderstanding. The two countries were willing to take full responsibility for the dispute and give Zhongzhou state adequate compensation. For a while, it seemed that the apology of the three Eastern European countries was echoing all over the world. The international image of Zhongzhou state was completely reversed in the fastest time. When people around the world believed that Zhongzhou state was innocent, the world's major powers, which had exerted great pressure on Zhongzhou state at the United Nations meeting and even made clear threats, all kept silent awkwardly. Every powerful country knew what the truth was, and they could see the humiliation of Wulan state, Oga state, and Ras state from the statements. But in the game at the national level, the truth was often the least valuable thing. Only the outcome could determine everything. Zhongzhou state won, so it naturally had the qualification to write the facts. Snow Country, the only hegemon country in Eastern Europe, once asked Zhongzhou state to withdraw from Eastern Europe at the United Nations meeting. Otherwise, it would bring war to Zhongzhou state, was the most embarrassed. On the first day of Wulan state's apology statement, the president of Snow Country, who was known for his toughness in the world, had called Zhongzhou state and expressed his intention to visit Zhongzhou state in the near future through the embassy. It was clear that he wanted to apologize. After all, the chaos in Eastern Europe happened in Eastern Europe. As the hegemon of Eastern Europe, Snow Country had to consider the attitude of Zhongzhou state, the hegemon of the world, when it could not expel Zhongzhou state from Eastern Europe. Although other countries were not as obvious as Snow Country, they also expressed their apologies to Zhongzhou state through different channels. The specific way in which these apologies were presented was for the benefit of the country. The change in Wulan state caused by Li Tianlan continued to set off aftershocks in an awkward and weird atmosphere. However, the major forces in the dark world had reacted as soon as possible and poured into Wulan state. On August 8, the chairman of the board of directors of the American Hero International Group came to Eastern Europe to inspect the investment environment in Eastern Europe and determine the investment direction in the shortest time. The Hero Group believed that with Wulan state as the center, the nearby 5 countries, including Oga state and Ras, were the most valuable places for investment. The Hero Group dominated America and was the absolute giant in the whole of America. In the dark world, the Hero Group had another name: American Heroes Guild. The chairman of the board of directors of the Hero Group was the president of the Heroes Club, who was ranked on the divine list and was very close to the peak of the invincible realm. With the Heroes Club statement, on the morning of August 9, the Eastern Church, the largest religious organization in Eastern Europe, issued a statement at the same time. Patriarch Calendar, one of the 4 patriarchs of the Eastern Church, was about to visit Wulan state and bring the glory of God to this war-torn country. On the night of August 9, Kasrater, the god of war of Star State, officially issued a statement that the terrorist Pluto, who had been wanted by Star State for nearly 10 years and had caused great losses to Star State, had sneaked into Wulan state. Kasrater hoped that Wulan state could provide convenience. The men in black would immediately enter Wulan state, and at the same time, they would do their best to protect the stability of Wulan state and stop terrorist activities. At the same moment, Fantasy World, a superpower in North America, responded to Kasrater's call and expressed its willingness to cooperate with the men in black's actions in Wulan state. On the morning of August 10, Arsis, the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, came to Reki City. The Holy Disarmament Corps and the Holy Punishment Priest Group were mighty. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, who had been walking with the Snowdance Corps, left the Snowdance Corps and re-entered the Vatican's team. On the same night, the Holy Disarmament Corps, known as the strongest combat force of the Vatican, was attacked. Black Knight, the leader of the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, personally took action and killed 15 Holy Disarmament warriors. He left before Arceus could take action and escaped unscathed. After several superpowers, more and more small and medium-sized organizations in the Dark World began to enter Reki City. On August 11th. In Reki City there was a storm, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. The sky seemed to be always gloomy, and the humidity in the air was constantly increasing. The rainy season in Wulan State had passed halfway, and the gradually cold air swept over from the polar region in the distance. Even in Reki City, which was not affected by the polar sun and the polar night, the day seemed to be dyed with a layer of twilight. The whole city looked cold and restless in the surging undercurrent. In just a few days, the whole Reki City was in a turbulent situation. The major forces frequently made appointments with the high-level officials of Wulan State and influential figures of authority in an almost ostentatious manner. All their actions seemed to be undisguised. The Snowdance Corps had been silent. The reason was simple. Since the battle on August 7th, Li Tianlan had been in a coma. It was normal for him to be in a coma after being seriously injured. But Li Tianlan was in a coma at the wrong time. Zhongzhou State had taken down Wulan State, but Li Tianlan did not have time to suppress all the variables, which was tantamount to giving other superpowers a chance. Although the chance was very small. Although Zhongzhou State had an absolute advantage. But if they entered Wulan State at this time, there was still a possibility of turning the situation around. Wulan State was too important. This was the most important place in the whole of Europe that military experts had to fight for. Controlling this place was tantamount to controlling an important lifeline of Eastern and Western Europe. The benefits it meant could completely support the rapid rise of a super-powerful family. No one was willing to give up this place. Now that there was a chance, almost everyone flocked to it. Most importantly, the Shadow Throne was also moving. The intelligence of the Dark World had always been extremely timely. Everyone knew that the elites of the Shadow Throne had begun to enter Reki City. The Shadow Throne had never concealed this news. Similarly, everyone knew that the Shadow Throne was cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai. The Snowdance Corps now represented Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. But who dared to say that the Wang family of Beihai could not represent Zhongzhou State? Who dared to say that the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State could not represent the Wang family of Beihai? As a close ally of the Wang family of Beihai, the Shadow Throne was moving, which at least showed that the Shadow Throne had never given up Wulan State. It also showed that the Sword Emperor was not satisfied with the fact that the Snowdance Corps dominated Wulan State. The Sword Emperor and Zhongzhou State wanted Wulan State. But the Sword Emperor did not like the Snowdance Corps to get Wulan State. Once some of these grievances were deeply thought about, it was enough for all the superpowers to find countless opportunities. Although the Sword Emperor was powerful, before the dust settled, who would think that they would lose? Just like the failure of the Jiang family of South America, 3 invincible realm experts and nearly 1,000 elites were killed by Li Tianlan out of the feast in Eastern Europe. The example of the weak defeating the strong happened every year in the Dark World. Therefore, when Li Tianlan was still in a coma and Wang Tianzong was silent, all the superpowers were trying their best to establish their own foundation in Reki City. Wang Tianzong seemed to have seen it, but he seemed not to have seen it. He had never expressed any opinion about it, nor had he targeted any force. No one knew what Wang Tianzong was thinking. As the superpowers entered Wulan State one after another, although the current situation in Wulan State was stable, the actions of the superpowers gradually brought some variables to the stable situation. Although it was impossible for the superpowers to completely destroy everything that Zhongzhou State had in Wulan State in the shortest time, in the long run, it would make people uncomfortable. Moreover, the superpowers that could dominate the Dark World had countless resources behind them. If they were allowed to go on like this, who knew what they would do? More and more doubts began to gather inside the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. At noon on August 12th, when General Anderson, the Minister of Defense of Reki City, was assassinated in his office, the news came out, and Zhongzhou State finally turned its inner doubts into substantive actions. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State personally held a video conference with Wang Tianzong. Li Huaqing was alone. Wang Tianzong was also alone. Separated by a screen, the 2 men who had reached the peak in their respective fields were unusually silent. "What's the matter?" Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Huaqing and asked calmly. His tone was flat, but Li Huaqing was keenly aware that there was an extremely bad emotion brewing in Wang Tianzong's eyes. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and said blandly, "How much do you know about the situation in Reki City?" "I don't." Wang Tianzong responded straightforwardly. His tone was tough. "I've been in a bad mood these days." Has the situation changed? There seemed to be a rage brewing in Li Huaqing's heart, but it was hidden. In the history of Zhongzhou State in recent decades, he was indeed not a very strong president, but this did not mean that he was incompetent. He was the president of Zhongzhou State. Who in Zhongzhou State would be so casual when they saw him? Wang Tianzong. Only Wang Tianzong. The current situation hasn't changed much. Li Huaqing slowed down his tone. But if you keep silent, it's not necessarily the case. The Shadow Throne has entered Reki City. You know what that means? What does it mean? Wang Tianzong asked. He was sitting in the living room of the hotel. It was raining outside the window and the sky was gloomy. There was no light in the living room. The dim light fell on him and he looked a little gloomy. Your cooperation with Rothschild is not a secret. The Shadow Throne entered Wulan City in a high-profile manner, which is tantamount to announcing to the world that you don't support Marshal Li Tianlan's action in Wulan State. This is almost a public announcement of your disagreement with Tianlan. That's why the superpowers are so rampant after entering Reki City. Don't you understand this? Li Huaqing's face was serious and dignified. His question was extremely powerful, with heavy pressure shaking the entire call screen. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. I don't get along with Li Tianlan? Are you comparing him with me? What makes him? Li Huaqing became completely serious and said, he is now the Marshal of Zhongzhou State Snowdance Corps. From this position, only he has public office and can represent Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. Why can't he compare with you? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and nodded. It makes sense. But there are some things that don't need to be publicized. Even if I do something, the whole dark world knows that Li Tianlan and I do not get along. Li Huaqing frowned. At this time, you and Tianlan are both in Zhongzhou State, surrounded by enemies. Our internal conflicts can be solved by ourselves behind closed doors. We are outside, but we can't unite against foreign enemies. Tianzong, isn't this a joke? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Wang Tianzong was indifferent and said blandly, tell me about your arrangement. On behalf of Zhongzhou State, I now formally ask you to let the Shadow Throne leave Reki City immediately. This is the only requirement. Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. The Shadow Throne's high-profile entry into Reki City had caused a scene of demons dancing in Reki City. If the Shadow Throne left Reki City, it also meant that Wang Tianzong did not welcome the Shadow Throne. It was already very polite to send them out in advance. If the people who stayed here did not leave, they were likely to face the sword edge of listen to the sea. When the news came out, Li Huaqing had every reason to believe that most of the forces gathered in Wulan State at this time would leave in disgrace. Even if the remaining forces were superpowers, they would not dare to act in the open. Wang Tianzong said, let's talk about it later. Comrade Wang Tianzong, I'm not discussing with you. This is an order. Beihai is a part of Zhongzhou State. I am the president of Zhongzhou State. At the critical moment I can order Beihai and you. Wulan State must return to stability. This is related to the interests of the entire Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. It is not a battlefield for you to settle your grievances. If Wulan State is lost, how will you come back? How did you get back? Wang Tianzong looked at Li Huaqing quietly. Li Huaqing's voice was very loud, piercing through the screen and causing a buzz. When all the voices stopped, Wang Tianzong said faintly, are you done? Don't you have anything to say? Li Huaqing's tone was cold. You're too noisy. Wang Tianzong said and hung up the communication directly. He stood up and looked out the window. The rain outside the window was messy and violent. The wind and rain howled as if there was no end to it. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and focused, and he looked extremely focused. If I let go, everything in the world will be gone, he muttered to himself, took a deep breath and finally shook his head. There was a knock on the door. The door was pushed open. King Tong, who looked dignified and noble in a splendid dress, came in. She happened to see Wang Tianzong shaking his head slightly. She was stunned and asked subconsciously, what's wrong? Nothing. Wang Tianzong suddenly asked, how many people from the Shadow Throne have arrived? King Tong felt a little strange, but she still told the truth. There are 20 experts above the Thundershocking Realm, 2 of whom are in the half-step Invincible Realm and 6 at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. The Fire-Flaming Realm troops are still being mobilized. At present there are more than 100 people. Wang Tianzong glanced at King Tong. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the role of experts at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm and even a half-step Invincible Realm was infinitely reduced. But Eastern Europe gathered the general trend of the entire Dark World. This was the battlefield of the Invincible Realm, the battlefield of the Invincible Realm on the Divine List, and the battlefield of the peak of the Invincible Realm. It was even the battlefield of the Chosen One. But how could the Dark World have a general trend at any time? Under normal circumstances, experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were already the power that could decide most of the situations in the Dark World. There were not many such people in any force. The Shadow Throne had mobilized so many people in such a short time. If they were the first to break the situation, the price that King Tong was going to pay for her comeback this time was indeed great. What's your plan? King Tong raised her eyebrows and asked. I'm thinking that the elites of the Shadow Throne might go to the office of the president. Wang Tianzong said thoughtfully. King Tong's enchanting body shook. She looked up at Wang Tianzong and asked, Are you crazy? Wang Tianzong didn't say anything. King Tong's face was cloudy and uncertain. Finally she couldn't help but ask, Why? The Shadow Throne entered Reki City in a strong and high-profile manner, so it attracted all the superpowers. Now the Shadow Throne was going to the office of the president. The first batch of more than 600 elites of the Snowdance Corps was stationed in the office of the president. The second batch of 2,000 elites was stationed near the office of the president. Li Tianlan was in a coma in the office of the president. The Shadow Throne going to the office of the president stimulated not only the nerves of the Snowdance Corps but also the nerves of Zhongzhou State. Wang Tianzong didn't say anything. What on earth do you want? King Tong stared at Wang Tianzong's side face. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said slowly, Pressure. Pressure? Only enough pressure can make me break through. I want the situation to be completely out of control and bring me enough pressure. Maybe that's the opportunity for me to break through. Wang Tianzong said softly. If, King Tong hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help asking, what if you don't succeed? Once the situation was completely out of control and Wang Tianzong didn't succeed in breaking through, it would mean that Zhongzhou State would lose Wulan State and even the Arctic Ocean Command. The foundation of Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe for more than 20 years would be completely destroyed, and the experts of Zhongzhou State would suffer heavy casualties. King Tong didn't dare to think about what the crime was. Then let go. Wang Tianzong laughed. His smile was very relaxed, but King Tong clearly felt that something heavy was slowly emerging in his eyes, which almost suffocated her. Let go? Let go of what? Actually, it's nothing. The current situation in Eastern Europe is a deadlock for me, but isn't it the same for other forces? It's just that I have a lot of choices. But at this point, Zhongzhou State is the only winner. For those forces, if they want to break the deadlock, they have to break the interests of Zhongzhou State. They have only one choice, and when they make this choice they have to defeat me. So I simply make the situation completely chaotic. Wang Tianzong said with a smile, if the situation is out of control, people in the world will attack Zhongzhou State together. If the situation is not out of control, people in the world will attack the Wang family of Beihai together. If you were me, what would you choose? Do you want Zhongzhou State to bear the pressure with the Wang family of Beihai? King Tong asked. I'm the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong said, and I don't want Zhongzhou State to bear the pressure with me. It's just that I don't want to be divided with Zhongzhou State first. Zhongzhou State should stand with me and face the attack of the Dark World at the same time. Li Tianlan did take down Wulan State, but so what? The most important thing is to get it and keep it. As soon as King Tong spoke, there was a sudden knock on the door. It was extremely urgent. Wang Tianzong glanced at the door and said calmly, Come in. A figure that surprised him appeared at the door. He was the head of intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai, Xianming. The surprise in Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed away. What's the matter? Xianming's expression was solemn, but there was no inconceivable fear. He had seen the same thing twice. For him, it was not strange no matter how strange it was. He held a big bag in his hand and said solemnly, Your Majesty, there is something here. You may want to have a look. Wang Tianzong nodded. Give it to me. Xianming handed over the bag in his hand. Wang Tianzong opened the bag and pulled out an X-ray from it. I verified the X-ray. It's not forged. It's absolutely real. Xianming took a deep breath. This thing suddenly appeared on my desk and I don't know its origin. Wang Tianzong did not speak. He had been completely attracted by the contents of the X-ray. The X-ray was just a part of a person's body. It looked like a chest. But it didn't matter. What was important was the dense, star-like scratches that were illuminated by the light film. How familiar was this scene? Wang Tianzong looked at this scene quietly, and his eyes became a little dazed. He had seen the X-ray of Qin Weibai when she was a child. The dense sword marks in it represented a similar but different sword stroke, including all phenomena. They kept spreading, crazily destroying Qin Weibai's human body functions. On this X-ray there was also a sword stroke. This sword stroke was completely different from the one Wang Tianzong had seen before. The one he had seen before was the 6 paths of reincarnation. It was all-encompassing. But now this sword stroke was absolutely condensed. All the sword qi gathered from all directions, bringing with it an unparalleled penetrative power as it charged straight for the opponent's heart. This sword stroke was the 24 moves of sword break of reincarnation. And this sword stroke was somewhat similar to the one he had seen before. There were 2 sword strokes. Looking at the distribution of the sword energy, it could hurt people without killing them. This was a sword stroke that no one could do. This kind of precise control could not be shown by any martial arts realm at present. The peak of the invincible realm could not be shown. The half-step chosen one could not do it. After Wang Tianzong broke through, he couldn't do it. The 2 sword strokes seemed to be from the hands of ghosts and gods. Wang Tianzong knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could be sure that no one in the Wang family of Beihai could do that. That sword stroke fell on Qin Weibai. The murderer definitely did not belong to the Wang family of Beihai. But what did this sword stroke mean now? Who did this sword stroke come from? Who did it fall on? The most important thing was the person who used this sword stroke still alive at that time? More importantly, if the person who used this sword stroke was still alive at that time, did he belong to the Li family? Chapter 471. Wang Tianzong thought a lot. However, he felt that his thoughts were not enough. Chaos often represents variables, represents confusion, and represents a lot of unexpected things. The situation in Eastern Europe could be said to be a big mess that the Dark World had not seen in decades or even nearly 100 years. When the unfathomable muddy water became black water that no one could see through, it was not surprising that anything would happen. In such an environment it was not enough to think too much. Wang Tianzong stared at the films in front of him seriously. The films were real. This also meant that such an injury and the sword that caused such an injury had indeed existed. It was very similar to the inexplicable 6 paths of reincarnation that had been left on Qin Weibai. For the person who attacked to cause such injuries, it was clear that they were torturing him. What did this mean? I suddenly remembered something. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Xian Ming's face was dignified. The origin of this film was completely inexplicable. It appeared directly on his desk without any psychological preparation. When Xian Ming set off, he had already told his subordinates that the entire Mount Dibing was investigating the origin of this film. But now he had not received accurate news in Eastern Europe, which was enough to show that the person who sent this thing was extremely mysterious, and his means were extremely clever. The reason why he came to Eastern Europe as soon as he saw this film was that this film, combined with Qin Weibai's film, represented something. What Wang Tianzong wanted to say was exactly what he worried and even feared. King Tong glanced at Wang Tianzong and said nothing. She hadn't figured out what these things meant, so she didn't want to interrupt Wang Tianzong's thoughts. Wang Tianzong's fingers gently tapped on the film and said slowly, I also know the 24 moves of sword. Xian Ming paled for a moment. He kept silent. He knew exactly what that meant. In the past many years, in the era when the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai advanced and retreated together and dominated the Dark World, the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan, and the Li family were all interconnected. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, and Summer Solstice once learned swordsmanship together. In Wang Tianzong's father's generation, the most outstanding people of the 3 families also learned swordsmanship together. Wang Tianzong knew the 24 moves of sword. This also meant that Li Guangtu also knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. That was not the point. The real point was that the friendship between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai was severed in Wang Tianzong's generation. Then, in their previous generation, the heads of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai also knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. That was to say, the 24 moves of sword imprinted on this optical film might have come from an expert of the Wang family of Beihai. The 6 paths of reincarnation, which he had used to kill Qin Weibai, might have come from the Li family. The purpose of these 2 swords was to kill. How could there be so many abnormal masters in the Dark World? Since there was a possibility that one of the top experts of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had 2 kinds of sword intent. In that case, could the 2 swords on the 2 holograms have been made by the same person? Wang Tianzong was sure that the man was not from the Wang family of Beihai. Then only the Li family, which had been close to the Wang family of Beihai, and the Lin clan, which had been in seclusion, had these 2 sword intents at the same time. What made people speechless was that the Lin clan was now on the same side as the Li family. At least from the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai, looking at the two X-rays, it made no difference whether the expert behind the scenes was from the Lin clan or the Li family. Your Majesty, could it be Li Honghe? Xianming suddenly asked. Few people in the dark world knew the 24 moves of sword. Few people in the dark world knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. There were even fewer people who understood 2 types of sword intents and could cultivate them to the pinnacle. This man was not from Beihai. The old patriarch of the Lin clan had been dead for many years. Li Honghe was the most likely candidate. Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "How dare you call Senior Li's name?" Xianming wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he lowered his head and said nothing. "I know your doubts, but you must remember that some people may be our enemies, but even if they are our enemies, we can't smear them at will. In many cases, even enemies need to be respected." Wang Tianzong said blandly, "Senior Li will inevitably hesitate in his life, but his life is upright and above board. Let's not talk about this film for the time being. Let's talk about Qin Weibai. If these 2 swords were made by the same person, Qin Weibai was still young at that time. Do you think Senior Li will torture and kill a child? Ridiculous. If he is really upright and above board in his life, what is going on with the purgatory of heaven capital today?" King Tong suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and shook his head. "Everyone has the right to survive and change the status quo. Senior Li can't be so bored as to torture and kill a child." King Tong stopped talking. "Your Majesty, does Senior Li have any brothers or something like that?" Xianming suddenly asked. "How do I know?" Wang Tianzong asked in reply. He thought for a moment and continued, "As far as I know, he doesn't." "Play that film," Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Xianming nodded and made a phone call. In less than 5 minutes, the big screen in the living room lit up. On the other end of the phone was the reference room of the Wang family of Beihai. Several loyal archivists put the film in front of the screen, bowed and left. In front of Wang Tianzong was the 24 moves of sword of unknown origin. On the screen was the 6 paths of reincarnation that had been imprinted in every inch of Qin Weibai's bones and flesh. 2 films and 2 kinds of sword intents, like 2 storms, kept gathering and entangling in the depths of Wang Tianzong's mind. Wang Tianzong looked at them carefully for a long time. In the nervous eyes of King Tong and Xianming, he slowly closed his eyes. The Sword Emperor knew the 24 moves of sword. He also knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. 2 kinds of sword intents kept surging in his mind. They merged into one and then divided into 2. Sword light appeared in his mind. The sword light changed from fast to slow, and he simulated it repeatedly. After an unknown period of time, Wang Tianzong slowly opened his eyes. "Do you think these 2 sword intents were made by one person or 2 people?" Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. King Tong and Xianming looked at each other and thought, "How could I know?" "I don't know either." Wang Tianzong said, "I just simulated the strength of these 2 sword marks." He paused. That was what he was most confused about. Now he was only half a step away from the so-called chosen one. According to the sword marks left on the film, he could imagine the sword energy that could leave such sword marks and make people hurt but not die, so he could vaguely judge the realm of the other party. If these 2 sword marks were made by 2 people, the mysterious person who used the 24 moves of sword was undoubtedly weaker. His peak strength was probably at the peak of the invincible realm, and it was even possible for him to reach the peak. The other party's lethality was slightly weak, but his precise control made Wang Tianzong feel incredible. The sword stroke on Qin Weibai was really powerful. Not to mention the exquisite control, Wang Tianzong thought that he was no worse than himself now in terms of the strength of the sword intent. And what made Wang Tianzong speechless was that now he looked at the sword intent that killed Qin Weibai and repeatedly simulated it. Wang Tianzong increasingly felt that it was his own sword intent. The 6 paths of reincarnation was a unique skill. But the patriarch of each generation of the Wang family of Beihai had his own path. The 6 paths of reincarnation of each generation of the patriarch was different. The 6 paths of reincarnation on this film was slightly different from his own sword intent, but they were almost the same. Wang Tianzong felt that this sword stroke seemed to be made by himself. The point was that he had never done it. And he couldn't do it. Even after the breakthrough, he couldn't do it. "Put it away." Wang Tianzong suddenly waved his hand. Xianming froze, turned off the screen on the wall and looked at Wang Tianzong. "Don't think about it if you can't figure it out," Wang Tianzong said. Xianming was silent. How could he not think about it? Whether these 2 films were of the same person or not, When this person was not from the Wang family of Beihai, he could be said to be an enemy. If the mysterious expert behind the scenes really came from the Li family, how terrifying was the Li family now? The remaining power of the Samsara Palace. The remaining power of the Li family. Sai City, Dongqing clan, and the mysterious expert behind the scenes. If the Purgatory of Heaven capital was counted, Your Majesty, Xian Ming couldn't help calling out. Wang Qianzong glanced at him. The opponent's lineup seems to be too strong. Xian Ming said in a low voice. Wang Qianzong pointed to the film on the table and said quietly, the person who sent this film to you also wants me to think so. Xian Ming was stunned for a moment. Obviously the other party is reminding me that the Li family is too strong now. Wang Qianzong said indifferently, rather than saying that the other party is kind, it's better to say that the other party is forcing me to take action first. He wants me to break the game. Xian Ming was silent. And is a strong lineup necessarily invincible? Wang Qianzong said, I know deity and Li Tianlan. Even if this expert's position is biased towards the Li family, so what? This is a good thing. Deity, Li Tianlan, and that expert, I think these three people will think that the Li family belongs to them. So who does the Li family belong to? Xian Ming's eyes lit up. Before he could speak, the gradually dimming screen in front of him suddenly flickered. Wang Qianzong glanced at the screen and narrowed his eyes. White light flashed on the huge screen. The white light slowly flowed on the screen and finally stopped. An old man appeared on the screen. He was dressed in a white robe, holding a scepter and smiling calmly. Xian Ming's face suddenly changed. King Tong had already exclaimed, the Pope. Wang Qianzong looked at the screen with no expression. The Pope on the screen was bathed in the sun. The bright light of the Holy Land appeared on the screen, looking particularly warm. Qianzong, you killed chaos. Shouldn't you give the Vatican an explanation? The Pope looked at Wang Qianzong for a while and suddenly laughed. His body moved slightly and he seemed to take a step forward. Xian Ming, whose face changed dramatically, couldn't help but take a few steps back. Just because the Pope took a step. This step was very small. But the Pope's body walked out of the screen in an instant and stood directly in the living room. The extreme darkness slowly spread in the living room like the wind, covering Xian Ming's perception. Wang Qianzong lowered his head and picked up the film that Xian Ming had packed. He said calmly, don't play tricks on me. What explanation do you want? Chapter 472. His Majesty sat in the bright moon tower and watched the lake for a whole day. The rain in Lin and stopped. The lonely boat on the west lake was still floating. That touch of night had not changed at all. On the lonely boat was a saint who was about to break through. The night did not change and there was no hope for Saint to break through. His Majesty knew that he would have one less threat in the chaos of Eastern Europe. But he was not happy at all. It had been 2 days since Wang Qinglei left. The X-ray had been in Eastern Europe for nearly a day, but there had been no change in Eastern Europe, and nothing that shocked the dark world had happened. When the X-ray entered Eastern Europe, it was like a stone sinking into the sea, as if it did not cause the slightest ripple in Wang Tianzong's heart. His Majesty did not know what went wrong. He also did not know that Qin Weibai, who was meticulous, would also leave an X-ray of that year. But he knew Wang Tianzong's courage and the Sword Emperor's caution very well. No matter what the Dark World's evaluation of Wang Tianzong was, from an objective point of view, Wang Tianzong was worthy of the words, great talent and bold vision in his life. Such a person seemed to be born to stand at the peak of ambition. As one of the most outstanding patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai in hundreds of years, Wang Tianzong was very decisive. It had been a day since the X-ray was sent. At least Wang Tianzong should have received the information that there might be a super expert behind the Li family. Whether this information was misleading or not, at least with Wang Tianzong's limitations, he could not see any problem. But Wang Tianzong did not make a move. This probably meant that Wang Tianzong would not make a move. His Majesty stood up calmly. The air conditioning in the box was on high and the light was dim. In the dim light, his eyes were still calm. Although there was no excitement, there was not the slightest frustration or loss. There was a small bottle on the expensive sandalwood table in the box. Inside the expensive crystal bottle were a few drops of extremely dazzling liquid. Next to the crystal bottle was a thick folder. His Majesty stood at the table, staring at the folder in front of him, and hesitated for a long time. He remembered Li Honghe's reaction when he saw the X-ray. He said that the Li family owed him. When saying this, Li Honghe held the X-ray and did not speak for a long time. He finally turned and left. And when he was about to leave, he threw the optical disc back to her. The Li family doesn't owe you anything because no one in the Li family can do this. These were Li Honghe's original words. The Li family did not owe them anything. His Majesty suddenly sneered. If you don't owe me, then who owes me? His eyes were cold and tranquil like a glacier. He didn't care what Li Honghe had said. All he cared about was the result. As a result, on the night Li Honghe left, he got a few drops of cardinal blood that were crucial to his recovery. If he got the cardinal blood, he would keep his promise to protect the Li family's secrets, because it was also in line with his interests. However, it seemed that it was time to throw the folder in front of him. His Majesty thought for a moment, took out his mobile phone and made a call. The video call's response was a little slow. After a full minute, the call was connected. The General of 9 Serenities in Zhongzhou State, Shang, codenamed White Tiger, picked up the phone. His aged face appeared on the small screen of the phone with a respectful expression. Your Majesty. His Majesty said, Wang Qinzong hasn't responded yet. No. Shang shook his head. I don't think he will do anything. His Majesty understood Wang Tianzong's decision. The whole dark world also understood Wang Tianzong's decision. His Majesty agreed with this statement. He nodded and said, it doesn't matter. The reason why Wang Tianzong didn't do anything is that some things are not important enough. Maybe he saw through your Majesty's mind. Shang said in a soft voice. Eastern Europe had now become a deadlock. Even if all the superpowers had entered Reki City, if there were no special reasons, there would be at most undercurrents surging in the city. Wulan State was now the place where all the superpowers confronted each other, and all the contradictions were concentrated here. But if there was no absolute certainty, no one would dare to take the lead to take action. Everyone would maintain restraint and reason. To put it bluntly, this was a deadlock. Wang Tianzong needed someone to break this deadlock and create opportunities. He needed an invincible realm expert to do all this. Because in such a situation, only the invincible realm expert on the divine list could break this deadlock, so that Wang Tianzong could see the opportunity. And His Majesty needed Wang Tianzong to break the deadlock. Because compared to the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong, he was far behind them in terms of background and personal strength. The farther the gap was, the more he naturally asked for. Wang Tianzong was now the strongest in the dark world. If he took action, it was impossible to overturn the whole dark world, but he could break the current deadlock and break it into pieces. What Wang Tianzong needed was a gap. And His Majesty needed countless gaps. The more gaps there were, the more he could do. So Shang felt that His Majesty's X-ray was not so wonderful. It was equivalent to reminding Wang Tianzong that there might be another hand behind the chaos in Eastern Europe, which would only make him more cautious. Wang Tianzong was not a fool who was brave but not astute. Which was more important, the power of the Li family or the threat posed by His Majesty, the hand behind the scenes? Wang Tianzong's current choice could tell. Wang Tianzong is not stupid, His Majesty said lightly. Shang looked at His Majesty and thought, isn't this nonsense? Do you know how to deal with smart people? His Majesty laughed and his voice was a little low. The best way is not to try to hide anything from him. If I send the X-ray over, I will tell him that after the chaos, I will also tell him that the Li family may be very strong now. It doesn't matter whether he believes it or not. It doesn't matter whether he does it or not. The most important thing is, His Majesty paused and said lightly, if I want him to take action, he must take action. So what if he is smart? So what if he is a half-step chosen one? Under the general trend, the real chosen one will have no choice but to be driven into a corner. So what if he is smart and sees through everything? When dealing with smart people, the most important thing to do is not to hide anything from him, but to give him a path where he has no choice. This was very reasonable. But Shang did not understand. Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise. The General of Dead Spirits of Zhongzhou State could be said to be awe-inspiring. Shang, codenamed White Tiger, was the oldest and the most experienced of the 4 spirit generals. But in the mind of Zhongzhou State, the correct order of the 4 spirits was Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, White Tiger, and Black Tortoise. The most experienced Black Tortoise was more important than the least experienced Black Tortoise. It was not a matter of strength. Shang's strength was definitely not bad. He could be said to be a top expert among the half-step invincible realm experts. In recent years, his weight was gradually surpassed by Vermilion Bird. In addition to his age, the biggest problem was that White Tiger was unwilling to use his brain. So Shang thought for a while and did not come up with a specific result. He simply asked directly, what do you want me to do, Your Majesty? From now on, Start all our intelligence systems in Eastern Europe, and entrust the intelligence agencies of several other superpowers to help me spread 2 pieces of information. His Majesty's fingers gently stroked the folder in front of him. His eyes were calm and indifferent. The master of Samsara Palace is not dead, and she is not even injured. Now she is hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity at any time, and even creating an opportunity. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong destroyed the headquarters of Samsara Palace with a sword strike, but it hit nothing. Shang did not speak and listened quietly. The destruction of Samsara Palace was too sudden. Under Wang Tianzong's sword strike, the entire headquarters of Samsara Palace was destroyed. This matter was too abrupt. On the one hand, it could completely prove Wang Tianzong's peerless strength, but on the other hand, it made people feel strange. But because of the recognition of Wang Tianzong's strength, the dark world did not suspect anything. Second, there is more than one master of Samsara Palace in Samsara Palace. Military Counselor Saint is not the strongest supermaster of Samsara Palace. His Majesty continued. This news had been confirmed. At least a few days ago, when Jiang Qiansong fled, the invincible realm expert who interrupted the followers' communication with Jiang Qiansong was not the master of Samsara Palace. His Majesty would spread this news 3 times, but he would not provide evidence. Maybe some people did not believe it, but as long as one person believed it, there would be some changes in the whole chaos. You have 3 days to do all this. I will wait for your news in Zhongzhou State. His Majesty looked at Shang and said in a tough tone. Shang nodded. This was not a difficult task, so he answered without hesitation, "Don't worry, Your Majesty." His Majesty smiled, looked down at the folder on the table and said calmly, "Send a person who can be absolutely trusted to Lin An. I have something here that can block all Wang Tianzong's retreat. Take it to Eastern Europe and find a way to send it to Wang Tianzong." Shang froze for a moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange it right away." His Majesty did not speak again and hung up the phone directly. Darkness returned to the private room. His Majesty sat on the sofa, closed his eyes and thought quietly. The chaos in Eastern Europe had now involved all his attention. Qin Weibai was undoubtedly his biggest opponent. But the purgatory of Heaven capital, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Vatican were also not easy to deal with. In this situation, His Majesty felt like a child grabbing a piece of cake that everyone coveted in the middle of a group of strong men with knives. Now he did have a lot of chips. The 3 disciples represented 3 kinds of power. But except for Jifeng's sword training school, neither Shang nor Melad could use their power unscrupulously. Moreover, he could use the power of the 3 disciples, but he also had to help the 3 disciples get what they wanted. Thinking about it carefully, there were really not many resources that could really let him squander unscrupulously. His Majesty sighed softly and suddenly thought of Jiang Qiansong and the Jiang family of South America. He really felt a little pity. If he could save Jiang Qiansong, the Jiang family of South America, which had lost 2 invincible realm experts, was badly injured, and had to withdraw from Eastern Europe in embarrassment, was bound to cooperate with him. A Jiang family of South America, even if it was badly injured, could play a much greater role. He would be able to play a much greater role than the 3 disciples combined. Given the current situation of the Jiang family of South America, what he needed to pay was much less. What a pity! His Majesty opened his eyes and suddenly wanted to know how Jiang Qiansong was doing now, and whether there was still a chance to reverse the position of the Jiang family of South America. He refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Jiang Qiansong's current situation was naturally not good. That night, he suddenly attacked but failed to kill Qin Weibai, which had already doomed him to be treated savagely. That night, the stars were lonely on the top of the mountain, and the moonlight was bright. Outside Reki City, which paid great attention to the environment, there was nothing to be picky about except that it was a little cold. The night breeze could be regarded as relaxing. Jiang Qiansong did not want to talk about cooperation with Qin Weibai in that Samsara palace. So Qin Weibai simply changed Jiang Qiansong's place. The disciples' judgment was actually wrong. Because Qin Weibai was not in the secret base of the Jiang family of South America. Shi Lin Fengting and Gong Sunqi returned to Mormon City together, with Jiang Qiansong, a super important captive. It was not the first time that Qin Weibai had done this kind of thing. So it was not the first time that the underground secret chamber in Mormon's Manor had received such a standard of prisoners. The secret chamber under the manor still shone with a cold metallic luster. In the house completely condensed by metal, Jiang Qiansong's whole body was tightly sucked to the high-strength magnet wall. The outside of this special house was metal, but the inside walls were all magnets. The huge suction came from every wall and ceiling in all directions, tearing Jiang Qiansong's body. Such a huge magnetic field was playing a role all the time. All signals had completely disappeared in this special cell, but the sound of the broadcast came in through a special device from the outside. This was a broadcast from all over the world, but it was all intercepted from the same clip. In all the clips, countless hosts were angrily rebuking what the Jiang family of South America had done in Wulan state in different tones, rebuking how cruel and ruthless he was in killing President Carlos. The news kept playing and it was transmitted into Jiang Qiansong's ears over and over again. The huge magnetic field tore at his body desperately, and the constant repetition of the news ruthlessly destroyed his spirit. Jiang Qiansong endured all of this without saying a word. He thought that he had persevered very well, but even he did not know that his spirit had gradually weakened to the lowest point. Qin Weibai had been living in the secret chamber for a few days, observing Jiang Qiansong's mental state, not anxious or impatient. Flaming Fire, who was a little pale, stood beside Qin Weibai and quietly looked at a black instrument beside her. There were only a few buttons on the instrument, which were used to control the volume of the broadcast in that special cell. There were also radio channels. Flaming Fire had been staying here almost 24 hours a day these days. She would adjust the sound every hour and switch the channel at the same time. Sometimes the sound was very loud and sometimes it was very low. There were various languages in the radio channels, including Chinese, English, French, and Latin. All the means had only one purpose, that was to torture Jiang Qiansong's spirit. Flaming Fire looked at her watch. It was 11:45 noon. She reached out and casually pressed a few buttons on the instrument. The sound in the cell began to amplify, and the different prophecies of various channels suddenly began to play irregularly. "That's it." Qin Weibai suddenly said, "You take a break." "I'm not tired." Flaming Fire shook her head gently. "Take a break." Qin Weibai repeated it again. Flaming Fire glanced at her and nodded, but she couldn't help saying, "Boss, I think it's almost done." "Not yet." Qin Weibai stared at Jiang Qiansong in the cell through the screen in front of her and said slowly, "Only when his spirit is the closest to collapse can I hypnotize him. The will of the invincible realm is not so easy to destroy. Their spiritual defense is no worse than that of martial arts. Boss, if your spiritual domain reaches the transcendent realm," Flaming Fire's eyes were a little fanatical. "Even the Pope of the transcendent realm can't easily control an invincible realm expert. At most he can protect himself, but it's difficult to affect the other's will." Flaming Fire said, "Oh. One more week and it's almost done." Qin Weibai whispered, approached the microphone in front of her and said calmly, "Mr. Jiang, can we talk now?" On the wall, Jiang Qiansong's body moved with difficulty. He was silent for a while, then gritted his teeth and said with difficulty, "Bitch?" Qin Weibai was not angry at all. She just said blandly, "Then you continue to think about it." She reached out and snapped her fingers. This action was very straightforward, very heroic, but also a little charming and delicate. Jiang Qiansong opened his eyes with difficulty. A huge butterfly appeared in the cell in front of him. The butterfly was colorful, flapping its wings with difficulty in the huge magnetic field, and its posture looked extremely distorted. There were more and more butterflies dancing. The whole world began to spin in Jiang Qiansong's eyes with the wings of the butterfly. The world was spinning. Outside the cell, Qin Weibai stood up and reached out to turn off the instrument in front of Flaming Fire. The huge broadcast sound disappeared in an instant. The absolute noise turned into extreme silence in an instant. Everything around Jiang Qiansong was still spinning, as if it was about to fall into a bottomless abyss. In the absolute silence and dizziness, Jiang Qiansong finally couldn't help but struggle wildly. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire walked out of the underground secret chamber. It was noon. The eternal night in Mormons was still the same, and the stars were dim. "Have a rest," Qin Weibai said. "Boss, what do you want to eat?" "I'll make it." Flaming Fire said softly. "No." Qin Weibai shook her head. Flaming Fire said yes, turned around and walked to her residence. Qin Weibai wandered aimlessly in her manor. The eternal night was cold. The manor was full of flowers. The rich fragrance of flowers blended with Qin Weibai's natural body fragrance, making people forget the vulgarity. "Boss Qin." A voice suddenly sounded. Qin Weibai slowly turned around. Tribulation came out of the darkness. "Do we still have to wait?" asked the only assassin of the invincible realm in the dark world. Qin Weibai said that Mormons would be the place of the final battle. But now it seemed that the place of the final battle seemed to be moving to Wulan State. Then what was the point of them waiting here? Qin Weibai looked at Tribulation in front of her with deep meaning in her eyes. "Wait for another week," she said softly. Tribulation frowned and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What do you want to say?" Qin Weibai smiled. In an instant, it seemed that even the night light became bright and beautiful. "Boss Qin, are you familiar with the Dark Knights?" Tribulation asked. The Samsara Palace had a close relationship with the Dark Knights. The whole Dark World knew this. The Dark Saint's spear, the murderous weapon of the Dark Knights, had been fired for the Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai did not answer Tribulation's question. She just looked at Tribulation quietly and suddenly said, "Can't you let it go?" Tribulation froze for a moment. He was silent for a moment and said, "Can't you let it go?" This seemed to be a repetition or a question to himself, but in fact he was asking Qin Weibai. "I can't let it go." Qin Weibai replied resolutely. Tribulation nodded. "Me too." Qin Weibai sighed softly. She seemed to want to say something but she didn't know how to start. In the end, she just said a few words with a pale face, "There is no result." "What about you?" Tribulation asked. "I'm trying hard. I don't want to give up either." She was talking about Tribulation and Angel. He was talking about Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said quietly, "Let's wait another week. After we tame Jiang Qiansong, we'll go to Wulan State." Tame? Tribulation glanced at Qin Weibai and thought to himself, does she regard the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America as a beast? Jiang Qiansong is here. What about the deal with the Jiang family of South America? Tribulation asked suddenly. Qin Weibai reached out and picked a white flower. She tore the petals and said lightly, "There are still people in the Jiang family of South America who can speak. Now the news has almost come back." It was noon on August 12th in Eastern Europe. While everyone was paying attention to the situation in Eastern Europe, a piece of news swept through the Dark World without warning. The news came from South America. After the great change in Wulan State, the Jiang family of South America, which had been silent and allowed the outside world to condemn it, finally made a sound. The timing was extremely delicate. At this time, it had been nearly 6 days since the great change. Under the pressure of countless public opinions, the entire Jiang family of South America was divided up by the major forces. At this time, the Jiang family of South America made a sound. It was undoubtedly a choice to make a concession. After giving up a lot of benefits, it tentatively took a step forward. Jiang Guochu, the heir of the Jiang family of South America, personally faced the media and admitted everything that Jiang Qiansong had done in Wulan State. When the world was in an uproar, the young man in his 30s once again announced an even more shocking news. The Family Council of the Jiang family of South America elected Jiang Guochu as the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America. Jiang Qiansong, the former patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, was permanently expelled from the Jiang family of South America and completely removed from the family tree. This ruthless and refusal completely severed the relationship between the Jiang family of South America and Jiang Qiansong. At the same time, it was equivalent to getting rid of those sins. And Jiang Guochu apologized to the people and high-level officials of Wulan State with an extremely sincere attitude. He expressed his willingness to give Wulan State enough compensation, whether it was in terms of economy or support. Such an apology could be said to be full of sincerity in a low-profile manner in front of the whole world. In order to express 120,000 points of sincerity, after the Jiang family of South America decided to expel Jiang Qiansong, the first thing the new patriarch did was to apologize. Not only the media apologized. It was also a face-to-face apology. Jiang Guochu, the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, wanted to come to Wulan State in person and apologize to Wulan State. This could almost be said to be the most murderous and ambitious apology in the Dark World in recent decades. Everything seemed to be pointing to two words. The Jiang family was not convinced. Chapter 473. Li Tianlan was still in a coma. Therefore, the major forces in Reki City were still celebrating. At this time, the whole Reki City was in a very strange atmosphere, just like the chaotic period when the old era ended and the new era had not yet begun. Conspiracies and deceit, blood and betrayal, coercion and temptation, struggle and degeneration, reason and madness, hesitation, greed, hypocrisy, and insidious, all seemed to be gathered together. Reki City had been completely wrapped in the dark world. Looking at Reki City in the dark, Everything seemed extremely naked. At noon on August 11th, the funeral of President Carlos of Wulan State had just been held. Prime Minister Rieker, who was temporarily acting as president, gave a speech that shocked the world. In the speech, Prime Minister Rieker fully affirmed President Carlos's contribution to Wulan State and expressed high respect and praise for everything he had done. The whole speech lasted 40 minutes. In the first 10 minutes he praised Carlos's great achievements. Then Prime Minister Rieker changed the subject. With a very serious expression, he said that Wulan State was in an unprecedented period of turmoil and that Reki City was facing a huge threat. At this time Wulan State needed the help of friends. When everyone just noticed that something was wrong, President Rieker had directly said that Zhongzhou State was Wulan State's closest friend. When Wulan State encountered a major danger and crisis, as a friend he asked for help from Zhongzhou State. President Rieker very sincerely invited Zhongzhou State to station troops in Reki City in Wulan State, and it would be better to station more than 10,000 elite troops to help Wulan State survive this crisis. Prime Minister Rieker hoped that Zhongzhou State could let go of the previous misunderstanding and look forward to the future. Under his repeated sincere invitation, Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, commander of the Arctic Ocean Command of Zhongzhou State, finally made a decision after consulting the Hidden Dragon Sea. The Arctic Ocean Command was willing to send an elite division into Wulan State to help Wulan State survive this crisis. On the morning of August 12th, on the surface, it was the division of the Arctic Ocean Command, but in fact, 10,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps had arrived outside Reki City. At this time the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, Men in Black, the Vatican, the Dark Knights and other forces of all sizes had gathered in Reki City. At the same time that the Snowdance Corps arrived in Reki City opened its gate. Bands gathered in the city, and there were bursts of gun salutes. Prime Minister Rieker personally went out of the city gate to meet the Snowdance Corps. There were cheering people on both sides of the road. All the scenes looked like a hero returning triumphantly from a phantom. The Snowdance Corps was temporarily stationed in the square outside the office of the president. Prime Minister Rieker personally urged the Minister of Finance of Wulan State to allocate funds and planned to build a military base outside Wulan State that could accommodate 20,000 people. This move fully indicated the possibility that Zhongzhou State would continue to send more troops to Wulan State in the future. The square in front of the office of the president became the temporary station of the Snowdance Corps. There were 5,000 people in the Snowdance Corps who first came to Wulan State. In the end there were less than 2,600 left. Among them, 2,000 were heavily armed troops equipped with the most advanced weapons of Zhongzhou State. Now there were 10,000 people coming to Wulan State. In total, there were over 6,000 people in the heavy soldier division. An elite army that was armed to the teeth completely surrounded the presidential palace. Roaring main battle tanks, swiftly cruising armored vehicles, silent but uniform formations. The entire city seemed to be filled with the smell of iron and blood with the arrival of these 10,000 elites. The Snowdance Corps patrolled around the office of the president 24 hours a day and never gave up any doubts. The reason was simple. Their army commander, their Grand Marshal, was currently in the Pavilion Lord Manor, still unconscious. The whole dark world was closely watching the Snowdance Corps outside the office of the president. Perhaps at the beginning many people despised the Snowdance Corps. This Special Warfare Corps, which was established in the final Battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, was divided into 3 groups to fight for East Island. On the battlefields of North America and Northern Europe, the Snowdance Corps did not perform well. But on the battlefields of Eastern Europe, it was a young man who finally turned the tide. Because of this, the Snowdance Corps did not have much importance in the Dark World. But this time, the young man who saved the Snowdance Corps by himself 3 years ago became the new commander. The entire Snowdance Corps seemed to burst out with unparalleled brilliance. In one day 2 invincible realm experts died in Li Tianlan's hands. The 5,000 members of the Snowdance Corps marched rapidly in 2 batches. Nearly 3,000 people broke through the defense lines of 3 countries in one day. 30,000 people defeated 60,000 people. They moved forward with indomitable will and were invincible. They were like the commander of gods and demons. They were like the army of gods and demons. After the battle, in the eyes of the Dark World, the entire Snowdance Corps had become the fiercest divine sword in Zhongzhou State. From top to bottom, it was filled with an invincible power. Now the Snowdance Corps was stationed in front of the office of the president. They had high-tech advanced equipment, an amazing morale with indomitable will, and a strict and cautious patrol square. All of this surrounded the office of the president. The entire office of the president had become a real inescapable net. This was the incomparable advantage that Zhongzhou State had gained in Wulan State. The Heroes Club had invincible realm experts, the Men in Black had invincible realm experts, the Vatican, Fantasy World, and the Dark Knights. They all had invincible realm experts. They were all stronger than Li Tianlan. But even if Li Tianlan was in a coma now, with more than 10,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps here, Zhongzhou State was the most powerful force in Wulan State. With such an advantage, it could even be said that the general trend had been decided. But the superpowers still did not give up. Countless killers, businessmen, socialites, negotiators, private detectives, and senior agents were active in Reki City. They drew the high-level forces of Wulan State to their side and destroyed any threats at the same time. In just a few days, Reki City had become a veritable dark city. The situation in Wulan State seemed to have gradually calmed down with the Snowdance Corps entering the city. But people's hearts began to fluctuate like never before. In the extreme chaos, rumors spread everywhere, casting a layer of fog over Reki City, which was getting darker and darker. It was said that the master of Samsara Palace had not died. The entire chaos in Eastern Europe was planned by the Samsara Palace. When all the forces were busy fighting for interests, the master of Samsara Palace was hiding in the dark, ready to give everyone a fatal blow at any time. In fact, the Samsara Palace had always had a secret agreement with the Wang family of Beihai. The master of Samsara Palace actually came from Beihai and was Wang Tianzong's confidant. Wang Tianzong's sword attack this time was all an act. The truth was that the Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai were conspiring against Eastern Europe and even Europe. The Qin clan helped the Snowdance Corps this time not because of the interference of the Lin clan. In fact, the Qin clan took a fancy to Li Tianlan's future potential and planned to unite with the Li family by marriage. Li Tianlan had fought with several invincible realm experts one after another and had received irreversible injuries. He had no hope of being invincible for the rest of his life. Even his foundation had been completely destroyed and he had become a useless person. Li Tianlan had died in the office of the president, and the news was currently blocked. The Men in Black and the Dark Knights were secretly conspiring against the Knights Templar of the Vatican. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, traveled in Europe many years ago and fell in love with a top assassin in the dark world. Now she was unclean. Everything was a conspiracy of Zhongzhou State. For Wulan State, Zhongzhou State was the real invader. The Jiang family of South America was completely innocent, and they should be the best friends of Wulan State. Prime Minister Rieker had applied for citizenship of Zhongzhou State and even sworn in to join the party. Tostel, the new patriarch of Rekvia, had been secretly contacting the Shadow Throne and was ready to expose what the Snowdance Corps had done at the right time. Like a hurricane, the rumors swept through Reki City in an instant, sprinkled all over Wulan State, and resounded throughout the dark world. These rumors seemed to be the result of the joint operation of various forces. Each force spread a version that was beneficial to itself, and if one thought about it carefully, there was a trace of possibility. The rumors became more and more intense, and the spread became more and more exaggerated. The entire Reki City had become completely chaotic. August 17th. It was the 10th day of Li Tianlan's coma. The rain in Eastern Europe was flying wildly, and the air in Reki City gradually became bitterly cold. In the conference room of the office of the president, where the heater had been turned on, Dongqing Rushi quietly looked through the summary information of Reki City over the past few days. The intelligence of the Arctic Ocean Command and the intelligence of the Samsara Palace had formed a huge database in the office of the president. After all the information had been screened layer by layer, it was still dense and innumerable. Dongqing Rushi looked at it quietly with clear eyes and said nothing. In the conference room, the high-level officials of the Snowdance Corps were studying everything that had happened in the past few days. Eastern Europe was in chaos. Reki City was even more chaotic. In front of the office of the president, it was the liveliest. The president of the Heroes Club wanted to visit the office of the president yesterday but was turned away. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, came to visit Li Tianlan's injury, but was also turned away by Dongqing Rushi. In recent days, more and more experts in the dark world began to wait for an opportunity to approach the office of the president. The artillery of the Snowdance Corps sounded several times, leaving behind the corpses of several thunder-shocking realm experts, but most of them were nameless. After all, the crazy rumors had some effect. Many people couldn't verify the truth of some rumors. But the place where Li Tianlan was in a coma was out in the open. There were many rumors about Li Tianlan, and it could even be said that he was the most. Some said that he had lost all his foundation, some said that he had no hope of being invincible, some said that he had become a vegetable, and some said that he had died. Everyone was concerned about Li Tianlan's physical condition, because the deterrent power of the Snowdance Corps was too great. In the Dark World, an invincible realm expert was indeed the peak. However, tens of thousands of heavy armored and light armored troops mixed together, equipped with the most advanced weapons, had the destructive power to destroy everything on any battlefield. The Snowdance Corps was the elite of the elite. When they stayed in Reki City, no one could relax. After all, the Snowdance Corps had just performed the feat of defeating 60,000 people with 3,000 people, and it was under the circumstance that they were surrounded by heavy firepower and had no weapons of mass destruction. Now the 10,000 people of the Snowdance Corps were equivalent to how many troops of other countries were there? A conservative estimate was that it was equivalent to 100,000 troops, and 100,000 troops were equipped with heavy firepower. Under such strong power, even if an invincible realm expert could struggle to survive under the artillery fire, he would be regarded as an expert in the invincible realm, not to mention doing anything. And Li Tianlan was undoubtedly the backbone of the Snowdance Corps. All the rumors were equivalent to the actions of the major forces to destroy the morale of the Snowdance Corps. Once the morale of the Snowdance Corps was unstable, the stable situation managed by Zhongzhou State would be turbulent. At that time it would be an opportunity for anyone. I still stick to this suggestion. In the spacious conference room, Rieker, who also participated in this meeting, said seriously, "Now, as long as we stabilize the situation, we are already in an invincible position. Everyone, no matter how the rumors spread, they are just rumors. Although His Highness is seriously injured, it will not be a big deal. We don't have to care about what others say. As long as His Highness wakes up, all the rumors will disappear as soon as possible. As long as we stabilize, we won't lose anything. I remember there is a saying in Zhongzhou State, endure for a while and everything will be calm. Take a step back." Li Zhonghu, who was sitting opposite Prime Minister Rieker, subconsciously curled his lips and said with a grim smile, "Endure? When did we, Thunderbolt, endure? It's true that no one cares about some rumors, but who can stand the clowns who keep talking? I have men and guns now. In my opinion, we should take advantage of the fact that His Highness wakes up to fight them all out. What heroes club? What men in black? Bullshit. Once my army sweeps over, I'll see where the Heroes Club can go to be their hero. Fight them all out?" Drifting Cloud, the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps, suddenly said, "Thunderbolt is indeed very strong, but our opponents are not weak. If they join forces, if several invincible realm experts rush forward, they may be able to break the formation of the Snowdance Corps. At that time, the Snowdance Corps will definitely suffer heavy losses." Losses? When have the people of Thunderbolt been afraid of this? Li Zhonghu looked dissatisfied. But such losses are meaningless. Rieker reached out and knocked on the table heavily. Now he was completely on the side of Zhongzhou State. Whether he was willing or not, the scene of him killing President Carlos had been stored in the top-secret files of the highest level of Zhongzhou State. He had no choice but to lower his head and be a dog at Li Tianlan's feet. If Zhongzhou State failed and withdrew from Reki City, his future would almost come to an end. And this was not the worst thing. Wulan State has seen the bravery of the Snowdance Corps, but the super forces in the Dark World are not the army of Wulan State. You are not afraid of losses, but if we don't fight them out, the Corps will suffer heavy losses. When His Majesty wakes up, there will not be enough power in his hands. How will you explain to His Highness? What did you say? Li Zhonghu stared at Prime Minister Rieker angrily. Mr. Prime Minister is right. At least now, there are several invincible realm experts in Reki City. We have nothing. Drifting Cloud said slowly. Li Zhonghu glanced at him and touched his big head casually. Wang Qinzong is in Reki City. Drifting Cloud was stunned. He took a deep look at Li Zhonghu and couldn't help laughing. Li Zhonghu was an absolutely fierce general. He charged forward and never retreated. Such people were often not particularly good at planning. But this did not mean that Li Zhonghu was stupid. Wang Qinzong was still in Reki City. If the Snowdance Corps came out in full force and made up their mind to wipe out all the martial arts forces in Reki City, what would Wang Qinzong do then? He was the Patriarch of Beihai and the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. The Snowdance Corps was Li Tianlan's corps and also the core of Zhongzhou State. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, he had no reason not to draw his sword when his country's corps was at war, no matter how reluctant he was. Deadlock, Li Zhonghu whispered. At this moment, there seemed to be something unusual in his eyes. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Everyone, including Prime Minister Rieker, was shocked. Deadlock. Drifting Cloud murmured to himself. The major forces are testing each other. They can fight in the dark, but they dare not fight openly, because whoever makes the first move is likely to be the loser. This is strange because he is not for the weak but for the strong. Wang Tianzong is very strong and everyone is targeting him. If he makes the first move, he will definitely be targeted by everyone. Li Zonghu said blandly, if he doesn't want to make a move, then we will create an opportunity for him to make a move. We are the most elite corps of Zhongzhou state. When fighting with foreign forces, Wang Tianzong won't make a move. What does he want to do? Does he dare not make a move? But in this way, Drifting Cloud frowned. It's worth it. Li Zonghu's words directly interrupted Drifting Cloud's words. Dongqing Rushi looked up at Li Zonghu and frowned slightly. She was pure, but she had been cultivated as the future hostess of the Li family since she was a child. How could she really know nothing? Li Zonghu's meaning was obvious. Li Tianlan now had a lot of chips in his hands. For example, the Samsara Palace, the Shadow Sect, Sai City, the Qin clan, the Lin clan, and even the Vatican were all potential allies of Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan could not use all of this power, it was not inferior to any super force. The Snowdance Corps was very strong. But no matter how strong it was also an army. The army was full of soldiers. When needed, soldiers should do what they had to do. Li Zonghu swept away all the forces in Reki City. He obviously regarded himself and the Snowdance Corps as abandoned pawns to force Wang Tianzong to make a move. At that time, the Snowdance Corps was destined to suffer heavy losses. And if Wang Tianzong did not want to commit treason, he would definitely make a move. He would definitely be targeted by all the forces in the Dark World, so he would definitely be injured. And the injured Wang Tianzong would definitely hit all the super forces hard. At that time, Li Tianlan would not have the Snowdance Corps in his hands, but the chips he left were enough to deal with all the remaining dark forces. All of Eastern Europe would also fall into Li Tianlan's hands, and at the same time into the hands of Zhongzhou state. In this way, it might not be a perfect ending to the chaos in Eastern Europe, but no one would feel that it was a loss. And the price? Maybe it was the lives of everyone in the entire Snowdance Corps, including Li Zonghu, except for the part of people who stayed in Im. More than 10,000 people. Dongqing Rushi's eyes became clearer and deeper. The timing Li Zonghu chose was so perfect. And his means were so cruel and resolute. This style of risking himself was very much like a person in her heart. Dongqing Rushi was in a daze. Uncle Li, would he be one of her people? This might be the best way to solve the chaos in Eastern Europe. But how could she bear to do that? Everyone fell silent. Even the two deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, were tempted. This opportunity was really rare. Even if he was criticized in the future, it would not be Li Tianlan's fault. After all, he was still in a coma. But the final result was that Li Tianlan could get all the benefits. It was a heavy loss for him to lose the Snowdance Corps. But compared to what he would get after the plan succeeded, it was nothing. The most important thing was that once Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai withdrew from the chaos in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan would no longer have to worry about the monstrous pressure of the Wang family of Beihai. Executing in Eastern Europe. Bad things would become good things, and it would be the best stage for Li Tianlan to rise and build his own foundation. Who could not be tempted by such an opportunity? To some extent, this evil plan was actually the civil strife in Zhongzhou state. But all of this was real and effective. As long as he could achieve his goal, who would care about this? No. A soft voice suddenly sounded. Everyone was stunned. They turned their heads. Dongqing Rushi put down the information in her hand and shook her head again. No. Young madam. Second Mississippi in the conference room, Li Wangxing and Li Zonghu stood up at the same time. We can't do this. Dongqing Rushi said seriously. This is the best opportunity, Li Wangxing said in a confused tone. But it's also the most dangerous time. Dongqing Rushi glanced at Li Wangxing thoughtfully. That gaze was a little special. Li Wangxing turned his head subconsciously. Why? Even Prime Minister Rieker, who had always sought stability, could not help asking. If Li Zonghu's plan could be realized, Wulan state would stabilize in the shortest time. This was what he needed most. Because His Majesty Sword Emperor has the Queen by his side. Dongqing Rushi said calmly, when the Snowdance Corps goes out to wipe out all the superpowers, if the Shadow Throne comes to attack the office of the President, what will Tianlan do? There was silence. Only Dongqing Rushi's voice sounded. Maybe your plan will succeed and His Majesty Sword Emperor will be injured. But if something happens to Tianlan in the office of the President, even if the Wang family of Beihai withdraws from Eastern Europe, will they win? Li Zhonghu scratched his head, opened his mouth and subconsciously glanced at Li Wangxing. Dongqing Rushi had no position in the Snowdance Corps. But she was the person with the strongest influence on the high-level officials and even on all the soldiers besides Li Tianlan. There were only 20,000 people in the Snowdance Corps. 15,000 of them came from the Border Control Corps. 3 years ago they were the trump-card elite Thunderbolt Battalion of the Border Control Corps. They were the direct subordinates of Dongqing Wudi. And now they were the direct subordinates of Marshal Li Tianlan of the Snowdance Corps. Dongqing Rushi was Dongqing Wudi's daughter and Li Tianlan's fiancée. This identity was more useful than any military rank. Li Wangxing coughed dryly but he frowned. He subconsciously glanced at the corner. Qin Shilai, the Dark Sword Master of Eastern Europe, was sitting in the corner. Qin Shilai was their important combat force. If they wanted to carry out this plan he was indispensable. But at that time the office of the president would indeed be extremely empty. If the Qin clan could protect the office of the president with all its strength, then maybe. A doorbell suddenly rang. Rieker said in a deep voice, "Come in." The Prime Minister's secretary came in and said respectfully, "Mr. Prime Minister, there is a guest named Qin Weiyun outside the door. She wants to visit Mr. Qin Shilai." Qin Weiyun? This somewhat familiar name caused everyone to be startled. Qin Shilai raised his eyebrows in surprise and then laughed. "That's my niece. Let her in. If there were any typos you could leave a message in the book review section, and I would correct it as soon as I saw it. Recently, I wrote a big chapter. It was inevitable that I had some negligence." Chapter 474. Almost everyone in Eastern Europe knew about the Dark Sword Master. In many cases, the name Qin Shilai was even more famous than that of Qin Dongqiao, the patriarch of the Qin clan in Eastern Europe. But now very few people present had heard of Qin Weiyun. Qin Weiyun was Qin Shilai's niece. The Qin clan was a real rich clan in Eastern Europe. It should not be a secret to the senior management of the Snowdance Corps, who had already focused on Eastern Europe, who were outstanding in the younger generation of the Qin clan. But the senior officials of the Snowdance Corps had never heard of this name. Even the rumor that the Qin clan intended to marry Li Tianlan a few days ago was not this name, but Qin Qinyao, the young lady of the Qin clan. Who was Qin Weiyun? In fact, this could not be regarded as a problem that the higher-ups of the Snowdance Corps were concerned about. However, this name gave rise to an unusual conjecture. No one in the dark world knew Qin Weiyun. But there were still people who knew Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai, Qin Weiyun. When the two names were put together, it was enough to make one's imagination roam. The relationship between the Qin clan and the Lin clan was no longer a secret. But the truth could never be denied. For many years, there was indeed a deep estrangement between the Qin clan and the Lin clan, so that they were actually much closer to the Wang family of Beihai. Even before Li Tianlan came to Eastern Europe this time, the Qin clan would become a close ally of the Wang family of Beihai in everyone's eyes. But the truth was the complete opposite. The Qin clan actually chose to stand with Li Tianlan. If Lin Fengting's words could make the Qin clan change their stance, then where did the estrangement between the Qin clan and the Lin clan come from? No one believed that the two families were standing together again because of Lin Fengting's words. However, no one knew why the Qin clan would suddenly change their stance. Until this time the name Qin Weiyun appeared. Everyone in the conference room focused their eyes on Qin Shilai. Everyone thought of the same question. Did Qin Weibai, who represented the highest will of the Samsara Palace most of the time, come from the Qin clan? No one knew where Qin Weibai came from. Therefore all of this was extremely reasonable. The only unreasonable thing was that when Qin Weibai first appeared in Zhongzhou State, she seemed to be from a small mountain village in the southwest of Zhongzhou State. Could she be an illegitimate daughter? Was she the illegitimate daughter of one of the major characters in the Qin clan? Light footsteps could be heard outside the conference room. A young girl with bright eyes and a pure face walked in. The young girl was about 20 years old, fresh and refined, without the slightest bit of arrogance and coldness that a daughter of a rich and powerful family should have. Her appearance could not be considered a peerless beauty, but anyone who saw her would feel very comfortable. She was lively and intelligent without the slightest bit of sharpness. Sixth uncle. The girl smiled and said hello to Qin Shilai. Her bright eyes narrowed like crescent moons. Qin Shilai nodded. Why are you here? The Qin clan was very large. Although it was a branch separated from the Lin clan, its internal network was also extremely complicated. Qin Weiyun's status in the Lin clan was not too high before. Her family was also relatively ordinary in the Qin clan. Her parents were executives of a subordinate group of the Qin clan. After many years of hard work and the dividends of the group, they could barely have a family property of less than 9 figures. Such a family was already prominent enough among ordinary people. But compared with the Qin clan, all the assets of Qin Weiyun's family were even worth a luxury car customized by several core young people of the Qin clan, which was quite inconspicuous in the entire Qin clan. However, Qin Shilai liked Qin Weiyun very much and had always doted on her. A few years ago, after Qin Weiyun returned from a trip to Western Europe, the status of their small family in the Qin clan soared. Now their family had a very close relationship with Qin Shilai. However, although the relationship between them was good, Qin Weiyun was not the kind of child who ran from Bayou State to Wulan State just to see second uncle. Now she came here. Could it be? There was a flash of confusion and doubt in his eyes. I'm here to see sixth uncle. Qin Weiyun giggled. Qin Shilai nodded calmly and did not introduce them to Qin Weiyun. He just smiled and said, "That's all for today?" Li Wangxing wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He glanced at Qin Shilai. "General, you don't have to look at me." Qin Shilai laughed and said, "I can do something, but at present I agree with Miss Dongqing's idea the most. This plan is really good and the benefits will be extremely crazy. But the safety of Tianlan and the lives of tens of thousands of iron-blooded soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, please think about it more." He nodded and turned to leave with Qin Weiyun. There was silence in the conference room. Li Zhonghu frowned and subconsciously glanced at Li Wangxing again. Li Wangxing was silent for a long time before he glanced at Dongqing Rushi. He asked with an extremely serious expression, "Young madam, how is the young master's injury?" No one knew the current injury. Li Tianlan was admitted to the office of the president on the day he was in a coma. For this reason, the office of the president invited the most famous experts in Europe. After the examination with the most advanced equipment, Li Tianlan had been in a coma until now. No one went in to have a look. Only Dongqing Rushi was taking care of Li Tianlan's body. Dongqing Rushi looked in the direction where Qin Weiyun left and was lost in thought. After a long time she whispered, "Very good. He should wake up soon." Although the office of the president in Wulan State was not shabby, it was not very luxurious. In Europe, where the power of capital was always above the law, the office of the president in Wulan State was far less magnificent than the headquarters of the Qin clan in terms of area and environment. Qin Weiyun was not interested in everything in the office of the president. After following Qin Shilai to his temporary residence, the first thing she said was, "Sixth uncle, can I see His Highness Li Tianlan?" Qin Shilai, who was pouring water, paused for a moment, and then smiled without showing the slightest difference. "What? Little girl, are you here with a task today? Was it a mission given to you by your family or by your sister?" Qin Weiyun giggled and pretended to be stupid, trying to get away with it. "Tell me the truth." Qin Shilai touched Qin Weiyun's smooth forehead and said, "Don't pretend to be stupid. Tell me, what are you doing here?" "Nothing. I just want to see what His Highness Tianlan looks like and care about his injury." Qin Weiyun blinked her eyes and looked around. Qin Shilai looked at her with a smile and did not speak. "Well, my fourth uncle and my sister asked me to come and have a look." Qin Weiyun struggled for a while, puffed up her mouth and told the truth. "Does your fourth uncle really believe the rumors outside?" Qin Shilai frowned, and his tone was a little dissatisfied. There were also many branches within the Qin clan, but there were only him and his brother Qin Dongchao in the line of the patriarch. Qin Dongchao ranked fourth in this generation of the Qin clan, and Qin Shilai ranked sixth. Although they were brothers, Qin Shilai had never agreed with his brother Qin Dongchao's approach. Although the two brothers had the same standpoint, their relationship in private had always been relatively stiff. Because Qin Shilai was a pure swordsman. Everything about Qin Dongchao was in line with the image of a patriarch of a wealthy family. He was the kind of person who had been through conspiracies and plots, and finally became familiar with all the darkness. He was cold-blooded, tough, powerful and self-interested. Although Qin Shilai did not like this brother, he also knew that the Qin clan needed such a patriarch to lead the way. Therefore, in the recent days when rumors were flying everywhere, especially when there were more and more speculations about Li Tianlan's injury and it was getting more and more serious, Qin Dongchao would naturally have doubts. However, Qin Shilai was still a little dissatisfied and even thought that Qin Dongchao was old and confused. Let alone other things, let alone how untrustworthy the rumors generated in the chaos were. Even if Li Tianlan was really disabled, would the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace really give up? If they didn't give up, what was the point of letting Wei Yun determine Li Tianlan's state now? Fourth uncle must believe it. Qin Weiyun took a sip of water and laughed. Sixth uncle, some rumors were originally released by us. Qin Shilai was slightly stunned and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. We released them ourselves? Qin Weiyun nodded hard. Qin Shilai thought for a moment and suddenly said, You just said that it was your fourth uncle and your sister who asked you to come here? Which sister? A few years ago, Qin Weiyun was in danger when she was traveling in Western Europe. It was Qin Weibai who saved her and recognized her as her sworn sister. This was also the direct reason why the status of Qin Weiyun's family rose sharply in the Qin clan. Since then, Qin Weiyun had been talking about Qin Weibai all the time. But Qin Shilai suddenly thought that Qin Weibai was indeed Weiyun's sister, but this girl had more than one sister. Not to mention Qin Weibai, there were several sisters in the family. Qin Weiyun bit her lip and hesitated. Sister Qin Yao. Qin Shilai understood in an instant. He was stunned and then didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Qin Yao. In terms of relationship, his relationship with Qin Yao was much closer than with Qin Weiyun. She was his niece and Qin Dongchao's biological daughter. Similarly, Qin Yao was also the heroine of some recent rumors. It was rumored that the Qin clan had taken a fancy to Li Tianlan's infinite potential in the future, so they planned to use Qin Yao to unite with Li Tianlan by marriage. At first, this rumor only spread on a small scale, but in the past few days, it had become more and more exaggerated. Qin Shilai was a little annoyed at first, but Qin Weiyun's words immediately made him understand what was going on. This rumor turned out to be released by the Qin clan itself. And his elder brother released such news. Was he testing the reaction of all parties or Li Tianlan's reaction? Qin Yao is also willing? Qin Shilai shook his head slightly and said in a strange tone. Qin Yao was the eldest daughter of the younger generation of the Qin clan. Her appearance and temperament were impeccable. She was quiet and generous. She seemed to be gentle and approachable to everyone. However, as her uncle, he naturally knew how proud and arrogant his niece was. The Qin clan used Qin Yao to form a marriage alliance. There was no doubt that they had placed a heavy bet on Li Tianlan. However, the problem was, what kind of women were around Li Tianlan? Dongqing Rushi, who was as clear as water and amazingly talented, Wang Yuetong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, and Qin Weibai, who was peerless and fairy-like. Qin Yao might not be inferior to the first two. But Qin Weibai was by Li Tianlan's side. How could his niece compare with her? Qin Shilai shook his head. Qin Yao is proud and arrogant. Is this what she wants? Qin Weiyun held her cheeks, her eyes blurred, and said softly, Who doesn't want to? Qin Shilai wanted to say something, but he finally fell silent. Indeed. Who wouldn't want to? When Li Tianlan first entered the secular world, some people might pay attention to his identity, but no one would take him seriously. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, this kind of contempt was less. In the next 3 years, when the Dark World had forgotten him, he suddenly appeared and completely established his status as the Chosen One. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, he killed 2 invincible realm experts in a day. That year, Li Tianlan was only 22 years old. He was not a real invincible realm expert. No one could be sure how far Li Tianlan could go in the future. Because the Chosen One was a legend. Today, the Wang family of Beihai was the best in the world, and the Sword Emperor was invincible in the world. But for the people of this era, who could imagine the initial glorious time of the Wang family of Beihai? This was a man who was destined to surpass Wang Tianzong if there was no accident. This was a man who was destined to be worth the investment of all the major forces. Such a Li Tianlan was worth any woman flying into the fire like a moth. Especially for ambitious and resourceful women, whether it was a goddess or a queen, when Li Tianlan set foot on the peak one day, he could completely support any woman's wild dream. Such a Li Tianlan was the most ideal husband in the eyes of all women. Who wouldn't want to? Qin Shilai thought for a long time. No matter how ambitious his niece was in the face of such a man, he was afraid that she would not have the courage to refuse, right? Willingly? He suddenly thought of Qin Weibai and had a headache. So, Qin Yao agreed, so she asked you to come and have a look? Qin Shilai asked. Yes. Qin Weiyun chuckled and said, In fact, I also want to see this brother-in-law. I'm also curious that my 2 most outstanding sisters are willing to choose him as their husband. Qin Weiyun had several sisters. But there were only 2 who were the most outstanding. Qin Yao, who was related by blood. Qin Weibai, who was not related by blood. Qin Shilai took a deep breath, but he still felt a little depressed. Sixth uncle, just let me have a look, okay? Qin Weiyun looked at Qin Shilai pitifully and said. How can I make the decision? Qin Shilai shook his head and said, I don't know how His Highness's injury is. Well, I'll take you to see Miss Dongqing later. Dongqing Rushi did not agree with Li Zhonghu's plan to send troops in the end. This plan was indeed extremely vicious. It forced Wang Tianzong to have no way out, but it also cost too much. Such a cost, plus the risk that Li Tianlan would take, was real. Under such circumstances, Dongqing Rushi could not agree. In fact, what she wanted most was the safety of her man. She had accepted the idea of treating Li Tianlan as her husband since she was a child, and now this idea had completely become an instinct. As for the benefits obtained, compared with his safety, it was completely secondary. The meeting did not end on bad terms. But Li Zhonghu was somewhat helpless. Li Wangxing was also helpless. It seems that there is no other way. Li Zhonghu muttered and shook his head. In fact, your idea is good, but the safety of His Highness is indeed very important. I neglected it before. If we send out all our elites, His Highness will definitely be attacked. At that time, the situation will be even more difficult to clean up. When you told me this plan, you should have considered this, right? Did I? Li Wangxing said casually. Did I? Noticing that there was something wrong with his tone, Li Zhonghu looked suspicious. Li Wangxing was slightly surprised and smiled. Of course there are arrangements. What arrangements? Li Zhonghu's eyes lit up. Li Wangxing shook his head. But it's meaningless. Young madam doesn't agree not only because of young master's safety, but also because she can't bear to give up the Snowdance Corps of more than 10,000 people. Li Wangxing scratched his head, suddenly turned around and said, I'm going to see His Highness. Li Wangxing watched his back leave, smiled, looked at the Prime Minister who was still sitting in the conference room and said with a smile, Mr. Prime Minister, you've worked hard these days. Prime Minister Rieker shook his head, but he was a little flattered. He was in an extremely awkward situation now. In terms of status, he was the highest in Wulan state. But in the conference room as Li Tianlan's dog, his status was the lowest. Li Zhonghu, a rough man, had never taken him seriously. Even Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, no matter how kind they smiled all day, were full of a kind of cold murderous intent. Only Dongqing Rushi and Li Wangxing treated him as usual. They were not polite, but they maintained a kind of respect. He stood up subconsciously, hesitated for a moment and said, Did you tell General Li about this plan? Li Wangxing sighed helplessly, nodded and said, Yes. What a pity. He shook his head. There will be opportunities in the future. I believe we will win. Prime Minister Rieker comforted him. Li Wangxing nodded. His appearance was relatively dull, so when he smiled he was particularly sincere. Please help me more in the future, Mr. Prime Minister. He bowed slightly. Prime Minister Rieker also bowed subconsciously. Li Wangxing assisted him and said with a smile, We are all on the same side. Why are you so polite? The corner of Prime Minister Rieker's mouth moved, and he finally laughed at himself. You are on the same side as His Highness. But I am just a dog. How dare I not be polite? I know Mr. Prime Minister is a little uncomfortable. Li Wangxing shook his head and interrupted Rieker's rebuttal. But please keep faith in young master. The reputation of a running dog is not good. But young master is your master, isn't he also my master? We are all the same. Maybe one day when young master reaches a high position, you will find that it is really not shameful to be a dog. The important thing is whose dog we are. He patted Prime Minister Rieker on the shoulder, left the conference room and returned to his room. His room was very close to Li Tianlan. This was Dongqing Rushi's subconscious arrangement. The Terracotta Army, Black Tortoise group led by him was scattered around, forming a core line of defense. Li Wangxing sat in his room and thought for a while. He took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The phone was quickly connected. An elegant and soft voice sounded on the phone. Hello. Madam, young madam refused your plan. Li Wangxing held the phone and said softly. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. Then it turned out to be the voice of Bai Qingqian, the current leader of Guangdong Province in Zhongzhou State. I was just going to inform you that Qin Weibai also refused my plan. Li Wangxing fell silent. The Dongqing clan was very obvious in the chaos of Eastern Europe. But Bai Qingqian's figure was extremely hidden, and this plan was so precise. Li Wangxing was very clear that if Dongqing Rushi agreed to Bai Qingqian's plan, then Bai Qingqian would definitely borrow enough power from Qin Weibai to protect young master. But Qin Weibai also refused her plan. This should be a rare thing for Bai Qingqian. Bai Qingqian was an extraordinary woman in the political circle of Zhongzhou State. She was graceful and luxurious, But only those who had really experienced her means knew how decisive and powerful this secretary Bai was. Before Bai Qingqian went to Guangdong, she was in charge of Qingzhou. In less than one term, she single-handedly got in. In 4 years, as the second-in-command, she forcibly incorporated the entire Qingzhou into the territory of the giant group. This alone was enough to show Bai Qingqian's means. Such a person would not do anything without absolute certainty. But when she had absolute certainty, she still miscalculated. What? Li Wangxing couldn't help asking. Qin Weibai found him not long ago, and her means were extremely direct. She completely dispelled his doubts about Bai Qingqian with a phone call. It was a phone call from Li Honghe. He had no choice but to trust her. He did his best to cooperate, but in the end, this was the result. Li Wangxing couldn't tell how he felt. She said this is not what she wants. Bai Qingqian said softly. Li Wangxing was a little confused. Her original words were that Tianlan shouldn't seek self-protection under the general trend. It's no different from dragging out an ignoble life. What she wants to bring Tianlan is freedom. Bai Qingqian said. I don't understand. Li Wangxing told the truth. He didn't understand Qin Weibai's crazy idea at all. I don't understand either, but... Bai Qingqian paused and laughed. Let's wait and see. Li Wangxing silently hung up the phone. At the same time, Qin Shilai and Qin Weiyun also found Dongqing Rushi by the small fountain in front of Li Tianlan's residence. Dongqing Rushi was picking flowers in the flower bed next to the fountain. It seemed that she wanted to take them to the room. The rain in the sky evaporated automatically around her. The flowers in her hands were stained with a little rain. She and the flowers looked extremely delicate and tender. Miss Dongqing. Qin Shilai called out. Dongqing Rushi turned around and nodded. Mr. Qin. This is my niece Qin Weiyun. Qin Shilai was a little embarrassed. He felt as if he was helping his own family poach. He felt very uncomfortable. I'm here to visit His Highness's injury on behalf of the Qin family. I don't know if it's convenient. Dongqing Rushi glanced at Qin Weiyun and blinked. Qin Weiyun also blinked. She seemed innocent, but after all, she was not experienced in the world. There was a kind of subconscious hostility in her eyes. In her eyes, Dongqing Rushi was the one who robbed her 2 sisters of a man. She was really annoying. Dongqing Rushi was very sensitive to Qin Weibai's hostility. She frowned with some confusion and said in a clear voice, Why are you looking at me? Qin Weiyun was stunned. Then she smiled sweetly and said obediently, Sister, you are very beautiful. Dongqing Rushi said in a clear voice, You don't have to go to see Tianlan. He won't like you. Qin Shilai, who looked embarrassed, coughed hard and said with a bitter smile, Miss Dongqing, don't get me wrong. Weiyun didn't mean that. Qin Weiyun's little face turned red. She glared at Dongqing Rushi and then at Qin Shilai. Qin Shilai really couldn't understand these subtle women's thoughts. He touched his nose, looked at Dongqing Rushi and said, I don't know if it's convenient for us to go in. Dongqing Rushi thought for a moment and nodded. She walked to the door with the flowers, opened the door and walked in. I'll tidy up first. Wait a moment, Dongqing Rushi said. These days Li Tianlan was in a coma. In order to take care of him, she had been living with Li Tianlan. Of course, she had to tidy up some girl's personal clothes. Qin Shilai nodded with a smile and said, Yes, yes. Dongqing Rushi slowly went upstairs. There was only one master bedroom in the building, which was extremely spacious. Dongqing Rushi pushed the door open and suddenly froze. Li Tianlan, who had been in a coma for 10 days, had opened his eyes and was sitting on the bed, motionless. He was not in a daze because he was not awake. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to be completely lost in thought. He sat there looking incomparably deep and profound. Chapter 475. Dongqing Rushi blinked her eyes. She didn't think that she was hallucinating, but Li Tianlan in her sight did give her a strange feeling. Li Tianlan, who was sitting quietly on the bed, was extremely quiet. It seemed to be a kind of quietness that completely settled all emotions from the inside out. It was not the indifference and calmness after going through a storm, but the purest quietness. He was as quiet as a rock, but he seemed extremely illusory. In this state, Li Tianlan was like a shadow that would be blown away by the wind at any time, illusory and clear. He didn't seem to notice Dongqing Rushi coming in at all. He opened his eyes and stared at the huge vase in the bedroom without blinking, silent. His eyes were very focused, but there seemed to be a vast expanse of fog in his eyes, vague and blurred. Dongqing Rushi suddenly felt that Li Tianlan was very scary now. She couldn't tell what was scary, but a kind of instinctive fear gradually occupied her consciousness, even covering her surprise when she saw Li Tianlan wake up. She hesitated and said in a very low voice, "You're awake?" Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at her. The fog in his eyes dissipated, and he became extremely calm. "How many days have I slept?" he asked. "It's the 10th day." Dongqing Rushi gradually calmed down. She walked over and sat beside him, reaching out and holding Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan frowned slightly, but he didn't ask about the situation outside. He just said casually, "Have you been living here these days?" His bed was very big. The first time he woke up, Li Tianlan found that there was a place for another person next to him. The big bed was surrounded by the fragrance of Dongqing Rushi. "Yes, it's convenient for me to take care of you." Dongqing Rushi blushed and whispered, "Did I squeeze you when I was sleeping?" Li Tianlan smiled, touched Dongqing Rushi's hair and stood up. "I'll take a shower," he said. Dongqing Rushi nodded and thought of the guests downstairs. "Mr. Qin is still downstairs." Li Tianlan said, "Then I'll hurry up." He took a set of pajamas and walked to the bathroom, his pace steady and calm. Dongqing Rushi looked at his back, and there was a little disbelief in her puzzled eyes. At present, she was probably the only one in the entire dark world who knew Li Tianlan's secret. During the 10 days when he was in a coma, Dongqing Rushi didn't let anyone get close to Li Tianlan. To some extent, it was to protect Li Tianlan's secret. Great changes took place in Wulan State in one day. Li Tianlan's injury was unimaginably serious. But what was inconceivable was that the speed of his recovery was also unimaginably fast. Almost every day or even every moment, Li Tianlan, who was in a coma, was getting better. How much would Li Tianlan pay to kill 2 invincible realm experts in a row? But such a serious injury didn't seem to affect his foundation at all. The injury, which could be fatal to any expert of the half-step invincible realm, was healing at a stunning speed for Li Tianlan. It was a miracle. Dongqing Rushi thought for a while. She didn't understand why, but she was happy to see Li Tianlan's injury getting better. The sound of running water could be heard from the bathroom. Dongqing Rushi stood up, took out a brand new Zhongzhou State military uniform from the wardrobe, and carefully put the military rank on it. She placed the military uniform on the bed and looked at it for a while before nodding in satisfaction. Eastern Europe was getting colder and colder. In the almost freezing weather, the cold water sprinkled on the body, with a kind of coolness that almost soaked the body. The depression after waking up from a dream was swept away in the cold water. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and began to check his injuries for the first time. All the wounds had completely healed and even the scars began to fade. The seriously injured internal organs had almost completely recovered, and the exhausted physical strength had also returned to its peak state. In general, Li Tianlan's injuries were almost completely healed. This was something that even he couldn't figure out. And what he couldn't figure out, he could only attribute it to the dragon vein. A large amount of luck gathered in him by the dragon vein was enough to heal all his injuries in the shortest time. Now Li Tianlan could be said to have returned to his peak state, but the only thing that troubled him was his dual wind and thunder veins. Twice the strength and speed of ordinary wind and thunder veins, such a heaven-defying congenital condition was truly perfect. Dual wind and thunder veins were the foundation, and perfect swordsmanship combined with strong enough willpower. Under such conditions, once he entered the invincible realm one day, he was confident that he could defeat most of the invincible realm experts on the divine list without even needing to stabilize his realm. But in the battle in Eastern Europe, half of his dual wind and thunder veins had been destroyed. Now the dual wind and thunder veins were still there, but after most of the injuries had almost healed, he could still sense that one of the veins in his body was still intermittent and useless. Li Tianlan's mood was a little complicated. He clearly remembered that he couldn't throw a punch in the battle with Jiang Qinyan that day. When his strength, speed, martial arts and willpower were all perfect, they were not concentrated but scattered. He had no weaknesses, so they became his biggest weakness. This was bound to be a problem that troubled him for a long time. Now half of the dual wind and thunder veins had been destroyed. From a practical point of view, his strength and speed were no longer perfect. But in this state, Li Tianlan could be calmer and could even exert a slightly stronger combat capability than in a perfect state. This seemed like a good thing. But there were two sides to everything. In an imperfect state, Li Tianlan would be stronger. But imperfection was not the limit. And Li Tianlan's martial arts was the pursuit of the limit. There must be problems with the limit. Even if these problems could not be solved by Li Tianlan for the time being, how could he be willing to give up? The most important thing was that with half of the dual wind and thunder veins temporarily destroyed, Li Tianlan's conditions were not perfect, so there was no so-called limit state. In fact, there was one thing that no one knew. When he faced Jiang Qinyan and forced him into a desperate situation, he and Fireman, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and the two sword masters of Yin-Yang Phantom jointly resisted the move of living with heaven and earth. But if Fireman and others were not there at that time, Li Tianlan had no choice but to face Jiang Qinyan, who had fought desperately to the limit, and he was also sure to kill him, as long as he dared to pay the price. And the price he had to pay was not his foundation, but his sword in the limit state. When fighting with others, Li Tianlan could start with the eternal silence of mountains and rivers. This was all because the eternal silence of mountains and rivers was the starting move in his kendo. Originally, Li Tianlan wanted to leave this sword in the limit state to the last, but he did not expect that just at the beginning, his limit state had completely disappeared. At least before his dual wind and thunder veins were fully restored, this sword would not come out. This was equivalent to abolishing the strongest card in his hand. The cold water washed Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan's expression was calm. But the waves and confusion in his heart did not stop for a moment. When he came back to his senses from his own thoughts, nearly an hour had passed. Li Tianlan was shocked and suddenly remembered that Dongqing Rushi said that Qin Shilai was still waiting downstairs. He shook his head, dried himself as quickly as possible, and walked out of the bathroom in a bathrobe. Dongqing Rushi was still in bed, but she was not sitting. She had fallen asleep. Her body was gently curled up. She was dressed, breathing steadily, and there was no defense at all. Li Tianlan walked over and quietly picked up the military uniform she had prepared for him. Dongqing Rushi's body moved. Go to sleep first. I'll go down and have a look. Li Tianlan touched her face. Her face was very white and tender, but it looked a little haggard. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly for a while. He had been in a coma for 10 days. During these 10 days, he did not know how long the woman in front of him had rested. If she had had a good rest, how could she have slept so deeply when she was relaxed at this time? Dongqing Rushi unconsciously rubbed Li Tianlan's palm with her face and turned over. Li Tianlan covered her with the quilt, put on the military uniform that symbolized power in both Zhongzhou state and Wulan state, and slowly walked out. There was a slight chatter downstairs as if someone was whispering and the voice was very low. Li Tianlan could only hear some words about his sister, brother-in-law, and the Qin clan. He adjusted the buttons of his cuffs, walked down the stairs and said with a chuckle, "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Qin." Qin Shilai, who was thinking about something, subconsciously shook his head. Suddenly he realized that something was wrong and stood up abruptly. Li Tianlan waved his hand casually and said with a smile, "You're welcome, sir. Please sit down." You. Qin Shilai took a deep breath. He stared at Li Tianlan with an undisguised shock in his eyes. Recently, there were more and more rumors about Li Tianlan's injury in the outside world. To be honest, Qin Shilai naturally did not believe the rumor that Li Tianlan's foundation had been destroyed. But Qin Shilai was not optimistic about Li Tianlan's injury. He knew very well how difficult it was for Li Tianlan that day. With such an injury, Qin Shilai asked himself that if he were Li Tianlan, it would take at least 3 months to recover to a certain extent. If he wanted to recover, it would take at least half a year. But how long had it been now? Li Tianlan not only woke up, but his essence, qi, and spirit faintly felt that he had returned to the peak. The injury was close to recovery, but it was not complete. Therefore, Li Tianlan could not control his aura very well. But it was because of the sword intent that he revealed intentionally or unintentionally that Qin Shilai was sure of the degree of his recovery. Li Tianlan might not have recovered from his injury now, but compared with a real recovery, there seemed to be no specific difference. How was this possible? Your Highness, your injury? Qin Shilai was so excited that he couldn't say much for a while. The injury is fine. I feel much better after sleeping. Li Tianlan said softly. The dragon vein was the vitality. He alone carried the vitality of a country, and the two complemented each other. As long as Li Tianlan did not suffer the kind of injury that could kill him in an instant, no matter how serious his injury was in the future, his recovery speed would not be too slow. This? Qin Shilai took a deep breath and suddenly shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. I remember the rumors in the outside world. Recently, the outside world has been saying that your Highness's injury is too serious, and even your foundation has been destroyed. If you go out now, I really don't know what the expressions of those who spread the rumors will be. My foundation has been destroyed, Li Tianlan repeated and shook his head subconsciously. Only those who were expected to enter the invincible realm were qualified to talk about the foundation. Anyone who could enter the invincible realm could be said to be a genius. How could the martial arts foundation of a genius be easily destroyed? Li Tianlan had only heard of two people whose foundation had been destroyed in the invincible realm. One was Summer Solstice, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai. Summer Solstice broke through to the invincible realm that year. Although her combat capability directly soared to the peak of the invincible realm, her realm was unstable. Li Guangtu was no worse than Summer Solstice. With the murderous weapon Infinite Sky, he barely caused this result with a full blow. He himself was at the peak of the invincible realm. Infinite Sky also exerted its greatest power, which was equivalent to the full attack of two experts at the peak of the invincible realm at the same time, and barely destroyed Summer Solstice. As a result, not to mention the collapse of Infinite Sky, Li Guangtu would also be seriously injured. This was to deal with Summer Solstice, whose realm was unstable at that time. Defeating an invincible realm expert and destroying an invincible realm expert were two completely different concepts. As for the second one, it was naturally his grandfather, Li Honghe. This was something that had just happened. But Li Honghe was in his 80s this year, and his foundation had been loose. It was normal for him to fall from the invincible realm after taking Wang Tianzong's break of reincarnation. Even without that sword stroke, Li Honghe's strength could not always be in the invincible realm. The foundation was everything of a martial artist. It was absolutely extremely difficult to destroy the foundation of a martial artist. As for Li Tianlan, his martial arts was now perfect, and his foundation was as stable as Mount Tai. Under such circumstances, unless he died, his foundation could not be threatened at all. No matter how serious the injury was, it was impossible to hurt his foundation. It's ridiculous. Li Tianlan shook his head and suddenly narrowed his eyes. Sir, did you just say that this is a rumor? Yes. Qin Shilai nodded. Where did the rumor come from? The warmth in Li Tianlan's eyes seemed to be gradually disappearing. Who knows? Every force may spread such rumors, and they also have such motives. Qin Shilai said. Li Tianlan nodded. He was silent for a while and suddenly laughed. It seems that Reki City has been very lively recently. Qin Weiyun had been watching Li Tianlan curiously. The youngest legend in the dark world, the future king, looked neither tall nor handsome, but his every move carried an indescribable style. It was a flavor that was completely combined with power, force, status, and the halo of the chosen one. It was hard to describe. Qin Weiyun was thinking about how to describe it so that she could go back and report it, and then she heard Li Tianlan's words. It seemed that Reki City had been very lively recently. This sentence was very light. Li Tianlan's smile was also very peaceful. But in an instant, Qin Weiyun suddenly felt an unprecedented coldness. A kind of faint killing intent seemed to fill the world in an instant. It was illusory, but it was extremely real. Qin Weiyun's scalp was a little numb. She had wanted to speak, but at this time she could not help calling him sixth uncle. Her voice was very low. But Qin Shilai suddenly reacted and said with a smile, Your Highness, I forgot to introduce you. This is my little niece. The faintly discernible killing intent suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weiyun, nodded and said calmly, Hello. Qin Weiyun forced a smile and said softly, Your Highness, I'm Qin Weiyun. She had wanted to call him brother-in-law as a joke. But at this moment she no longer had that kind of courage. Li Tianlan suddenly said yes, looked at Qin Weiyun and then looked at Qin Shilai. His body slowly relaxed and he leaned against the sofa. Boss Qin is Weiyun's sister. Qin Shilai explained with a smile, It's just a coincidence that this name is a bit of a coincidence. In fact, Boss Qin has no blood relationship with the Qin clan. She is a partner of the Qin clan. Well, this is also because of Weiyun. Li Tianlan felt that something was wrong, but he could not tell what was wrong. He nodded subconsciously and suddenly said with a smile, How did you and Little Bai meet? Qin Weiyun's face was still a little pale, but she subconsciously wanted to say a few more words to her brother-in-law. Hearing this, she did not think too much and whispered, A few years ago, I met her when I traveled to England. Go on. Li Tianlan smiled. Qin Weiyun seemed to gradually regain her composure. She said with a smile, It's nothing. At that time, our family had a very difficult opponent in England. She was a famous devil in Europe. She heard that I was a member of the Qin family and wanted to kill me. Then my sister sent someone to kill her. Finally, she recognized me as her sister and... Qin Weiyun's voice suddenly paused. She seemed to realize that she had said something she shouldn't have said. Her face instantly turned pale and she shut up in a panic. She refused to say another word. When King Tong hurriedly pushed open the door of Wang Tianzong's room and broke in, Wang Tianzong was video chatting with Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice's figure appeared on the big screen high above. Looking at King Tong, she seemed to be really condescending. King Tong had never liked Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice didn't like King Tong very much either. So seeing this scene, King Tong's face changed. She snorted coldly and subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave. But as soon as she turned around, her body stopped in place. Wang Tianzong looked at her in surprise. Summer Solstice was even more surprised. Her eyes stopped on the folder in King Tong's hand, and then she smiled calmly. "You guys talk first. I'll hang up." The screen went black. Summer Solstice's figure disappeared from the screen. King Tong's face was a little ugly, but she forced herself to endure it. "Urgent?" Wang Tianzong asked. He knew King Tong's character very well. Based on her character, if it wasn't a real emergency, she would definitely turn around and leave the moment she saw Summer Solstice. Now she was standing where she was. This kind of compromise was not easy, and it also meant that the matter was extremely urgent. King Tong took a deep breath. Thinking of the news she had just received, her face suddenly changed again. "You should see this." She handed the information in her hand to Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong took the folder in his hand and opened it to glance at it. It was the information of a family. The Taylor family? Wang Tianzong glanced at King Tong. He felt that this family was a little strange but also a little familiar. After thinking for a while, he said uncertainly, "The Taylor family of Fog City?" King Tong nodded with a solemn expression. Wang Tianzong was a little confused, but he didn't ask much. In his impression, the Taylor family could barely be regarded as a second-rate wealthy family in Europe. It was not weak in England, but England was the strongest base camp of Rothschild. The Wang family of Beihai had a very close relationship with Rothschild, so Wang Tianzong naturally would not pay attention to the Taylor family. But this family, why did the more he thought about it, the more familiar it was? The information showed the information of some important members of the Taylor family in recent years. Wang Tianzong frowned and suddenly said, "This family? I seem to have heard of it somewhere in the past few years." "No, I just heard about it from Shen Ming recently." "Haven't you thought of it yet?" King Tong's voice was a little hollow. "Some time ago you asked Shen Ming to investigate Qin Weibai." Wang Tianzong's palm froze slightly. He raised his head and looked at King Tong. He finally remembered where he had heard the name of the Taylor family. When the name Qin Weibai first appeared in the eyes of the dark world, it was at the annual meeting of the Taylor family. Wang Tianzong frowned tightly. "I've only just received this information as well." King Tong managed to suppress her fluctuating thoughts. "And I have confirmed it. If I'm not wrong, there is a 90% chance that the Taylor family is an important part of the Samsara Palace." "What does this mean?" Wang Tianzong simply put down the information in his hand. "Do you remember who the master of Samsara Palace killed for the only time in England a few years ago?" King Tong asked. "The witch." Wang Tianzong said a name. "Yes, the witch, a famous devil in the half-step invincible realm in Europe in recent years. She had a deep conflict with the Qin clan, so she fled from Eastern Europe to Western Europe." King Tong said slowly, "A few years ago, the witch had her eyes on an Asian girl. The master of Samsara Palace happened to meet her, killed the witch, and recognized the girl she saved as her sworn sister." Wang Tianzong nodded and said yes. "From then on, Qin Weibai came into our sight. We have been investigating the relationship between Qin Weibai and the Qin clan, and we have come to the conclusion that Qin Weibai has nothing to do with the Qin clan." King Tong continued. "Is it wrong?" Wang Tianzong frowned. "Yes and no." King Tong suddenly became excited. Because the sworn sister saved by the master of Samsara Palace was not Qin Weibai at all. It's just that the annual meeting of the Tylo family is not very influential, and the Tylo group deliberately confuses people, so the girl became Qin Weibai. She pointed to the information beside Wang Tianzong. At that time the witch did not target Qin Weibai. The girl she targeted was called Qin Weiyun. She was a member of the Qin clan in Eastern Europe. Half of these materials are evidence. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. "Really?" His whole spirit seemed to be condensed in an instant. King Tong looked at Wang Tianzong with complicated eyes and nodded. "This is Rothschild's mistake. It's not until today that we know the truth. The most ridiculous thing is that we know the truth because of an external material." Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time. The wild rain outside swept the whole city. The whole city was filled with ice. Wang Tianzong looked at the information in front of him and was lost in thought. When Qin Weibai appeared in the Dark World for the first time, she was in England. In order to save her, the master of Samsara Palace killed the witch and the witch in Europe. Then she recognized Qin Weibai as her sworn sister. Later, Qin Weibai became the second person who could represent the will of Samsara Palace, only under the palace master. This was the consensus of the Dark World. But this consensus was now completely overturned. All the information about Qin Weibai seemed to be messed up that night. The master of Samsara Palace did not save Qin Weibai that year. She saved Qin Weiyun. Then, where did Qin Weibai come from? Peak. Chapter 476. The news of Li Tianlan's awakening quickly spread throughout the office of the president. The atmosphere in the presidential palace was still heavy, but it was no longer oppressive. Tens of thousands of elite soldiers heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. When Li Tianlan was in a coma, the Snowdance Corps was not humiliated, but everyone felt extremely humiliated. In order to seek stability, the higher-ups of the Corps chose to stick to their positions, which also meant that they could not take the initiative to attack. They could only watch the dark forces show off in Reki City one after another. In order to test Li Tianlan's injury, some forces even sent masters to test the situation in person. The Snowdance Corps killed some of them. Although they were still ruthless when they thought about it carefully, they always felt like they were being bullied at home. Now that Li Tianlan had woken up, the entire Snowdance Corps breathed a sigh of relief, and their morale rose again. Li Tianlan was not in a hurry to do anything. He just held a temporary meeting with high-level officials in the office of the president. In addition to the high-level officials of the Snowdance Corps in the office of the president, Prime Minister Riker of Wulan State, Dark Sword Master Qin Shilai, Lin Yuxian, General Yi of 9 Heavens of Zhongzhou State, and Lieutenant General Li Wangxing of 9 Regions were all invited. The meeting was called abruptly. However, the higher-ups arrived very quickly. Li Tianlan sat in the main seat of the conference room and watched the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps come in one by one. He felt calm inside and seemed more and more peaceful. Everyone was laughing. Li Tianlan's sobriety was something they had been looking forward to for a long time. What surprised them even more was that Li Tianlan's injury seemed to be recovering very well. But in Reki City, where people's hearts were gradually in turmoil, Li Tianlan's recovery from his injury meant too many things. The high-level members of the Snowdance Corps had no reason to be unhappy. "Young master, you look good." Li Wangxing took the initiative to speak with a smile. For Li Tianlan, he was absolutely one of his own. But for the Snowdance Corps, General Jiutian and Lieutenant General Jiuzhou were both guests. Therefore, they were the closest to Li Tianlan and it was convenient for them to talk. "I feel good after a nap." Li Tianlan nodded. "Your Highness, Deputy Marshal Lu Yun is on the phone with the Vice Marshal. He should be a little late." Li Zhonghu came over and whispered in Li Tianlan's ear. Li Tianlan nodded casually. Watching Prime Minister Riker walk in, he said directly, "Almost everyone is here, so now." Bang. The door that Rick had just closed was violently pushed open from the outside. The door slammed against the wall with a loud and dull thud. Lu Yun walked in with a cold expression. Li Tianlan was stunned. Drifting Cloud didn't seem to expect that there would be so many people in the conference room. After a moment of silence, he managed to ease his expression and saluted Li Tianlan. "Take a seat." Li Tianlan asked, "What made you so angry?" Lu Yun's expression, which had barely calmed down, changed again, but he seemed to be suppressing his anger. He shook his head and said, "The call with the Vice Marshal just now wasn't pleasant." Li Tianlan motioned for Drifting Cloud to continue. Qin Qingwan would definitely not stay in Im. Li Tianlan had expected this. As one of the core high-level members of the Beihai Corps, although they were enemies, Qin Qingwan's leadership ability and personal force were outstanding if he put aside his standpoint. Otherwise, the Wang family of Beihai would not have transferred him to the Snowdance Corps and regarded him as the strongest force to check and balance him. Li Tianlan was also a little surprised. He had been unconscious for 10 days. 10 days was not long, but it was definitely not short either. During this time, Qin Qingwan still stayed in Im and didn't take any action until today. For this alone, Li Tianlan felt that he should praise Vice Marshal Chen for his patience. Drifting Cloud looked even angrier. "Vice Marshal means that your Highness has been in a coma for a long time, and the Snowdance Corps needs someone to take charge of the overall situation. He will arrive in Reki City tonight to visit your injury and temporarily take charge of the overall situation of Reki City for you." His voice was so loud that it directly spread throughout the conference room. Li Wangxing and Yi remained calm. Lin Yuxian listened with a smile. But the faces of the other high-level members of the Snowdance Corps suddenly changed. Li Zhonghu, who especially didn't like Qin Qinghuan, directly sneered and said, "Take charge of the overall situation for your highness? Does he deserve it? What the hell? Did he turn a deaf ear to his highness's previous military order? Does he want to take charge of the overall situation? He may not be able to." Drifting Cloud's tone was a little mocking. "But if you are transferred away, he can." Li Zhonghu was stunned and seemed to think that he had heard wrong. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and didn't speak for a long time. Qin Qinghuan was the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps. The vice-marshal was actually equivalent to the deputy marshal, but his ranking was ahead of the two deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. If Li Tianlan couldn't give orders, Qin Qinghuan's position was indeed qualified for him to give orders on Li Tianlan's behalf. If all this could barely be regarded as a normal phenomenon, then the attempt to transfer Li Zhonghu away was a bit intriguing. "Did he say that?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. "Yes, he said that Commander Li Zhonghu should rest for a while and suggested that he be transferred back to Imta garrison. He will temporarily take over everything in Reki City on behalf of your highness," Drifting Cloud said calmly. Lu Yun said calmly. His expression was furious, but his eyes were abnormally clear. Li Tianlan laughed and looked extremely happy. If Qin Qinghuan disregarded the military order during his coma and temporarily replaced Li Tianlan to take charge of the overall situation, then transferring Li Zhonghu away completely showed his ambition. If Li Zhonghu was forcibly transferred away, more than 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion must leave with Li Zhonghu. Although there were only 5,000 people under Qin Qinghuan's command, they were also elites of the Beihai Corps and the Shadow Sting Army. Their combat capability was not much lower than that of the Thunderbolt Battalion, and they could also control the situation here. If Li Zhonghu took away the direct troops, everything in Reki City today, even Li Tianlan's own life, would fall into the hands of Qin Qinghuan and the Wang family of Beihai. If he didn't take the troops with him and went to I'm alone, when necessary the more than 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion soldiers would definitely be abandoned in conflicts and slowly consumed. At that time, even if Li Tianlan woke up without the direct troops, it would be useless to hold the hat of a marshal. As for Li Zhonghu's disobedience to orders, that was probably what Qin Qinghuan wanted to see the most. The Special Warfare Battalion was often stricter than the army headquarters, and its authority was freer. In sensitive times, the military orders of the Special Warfare Battalion were above everything else. If Li Zhonghu dared to disobey them, Qin Qinghuan would dare to execute him for treason. As long as Li Zhonghu was squeezed out, it didn't matter if more than 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion soldiers left or not. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud used to be assassins. Now they were still inexperienced and could not defeat Qin Qinghuan. Qin Qinghuan, who had an absolute advantage in Im, could cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai in the name of the Snowdance Corps. It might not be long before the whole Reki City would hang the flag of the Snowdance Corps. As for Prime Minister Rieker, it was impossible for him to change his position, but what could it change? The terrorist Jiang Qiansong could kill Carlos. Was Prime Minister Rieker 100% safe? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and his smile grew bigger and bigger. He had to admit that Qin Qinghuan had found a good opportunity. There was nothing wrong with him except that he was shameless. But the premise was that if the plan was to be implemented smoothly, Li Tianlan's injury must be so serious that he would be in a coma for a long time. Li Tianlan was awake now. Qin Qinghuan's action was still a step too slow. "He still doesn't know that I woke up?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Drifting Cloud hesitated for a moment, nodded and said, "The news that your highness woke up was very sudden. Before I had time to tell the vice-marshal had hung up the phone. When I called, the other party had already turned off his phone." Li Tianlan laughed again. The others also laughed and their smiles were meaningful. "It seems that our vice-marshal is in a hurry," Cool Breeze said with a smile and there was some playfulness in his eyes. "Ignore him." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Let's wait for him." He suddenly turned his head to look at Prime Minister Rieker and asked, "How is the collection of the bodies of the victims of the Snowdance Corps?" Everyone was stunned for a moment. No one expected that Li Tianlan would first mention this matter. In the chaotic situation outside, he first cared about the bodies of the martyrs of his own corps. Such a thought was not right or wrong, but such a gesture was undoubtedly worthy of respect. Rieker hesitated a little and said softly, Hoga and the Prime Minister of Ra State both spoke to me on the phone. The Snowdance Corps has sacrificed a lot of people. They hope that your highness can give them some more time. Rieker said this helplessly. Everyone knew that the Snowdance Corps had marched all the way, and the place where the war broke out was the border between Oga State and Wulon State. After that, all the wars were carried out in Wulon State. The land of Oga State and Ra State had never been burned with the flames of war at all. But now Li Tianlan asked these two countries for the bodies of the martyrs. Rieker shook his head, full of bitterness. I don't have time for them. At this time tomorrow, all the bodies must be sent to Wulon State. I will personally hold a farewell meeting in the Hero Square. This is the last chance for Oga State and Ra State. I can't see the bodies and then they will see the actions of the Snowdance Corps. Li Tianlan said in a cold tone. If one person was missing, one town would be destroyed. If one team was missing, one city would be destroyed. This was what Li Tianlan had said at the beginning. For small countries like Oga State and Ra State, such a threat was absolutely powerful. The most important thing was that there were no bodies at all in Oga State and Ra State. Whether the final result was one person less or one city less, it was all up to Li Tianlan. Rieker sighed slightly. Even though his current position was exactly the same as Li Tianlan's, under such circumstances, he still felt that His Highness was too overbearing. In addition, is His Majesty the Sword Emperor still in Reki City? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Yes. Drifting Cloud replied with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded and said, well, invite His Majesty the Sword Emperor to the farewell meeting of the Snowdance Corps. After saying this he thought for a moment and then shook his head. Maybe it's not necessary. I think we'll see him tonight at the latest. I'll invite him in person then. Climax. Chapter 477. The conference room was silent for a moment. Li Tianlan said that he might see Wang Tianzong tonight. Everyone knew the meaning of this sentence. In this era, the name Wang Tianzong brought almost suffocating pressure to everyone. No one wanted to be Wang Tianzong's enemy. However, this was the general trend. There was no other choice. Li Tianlan unconsciously tapped the table with his fingers and remained silent for a long time, until a voice rang out. Your Highness, what about the other forces? The one who spoke was Sun Mengran, the deputy commander of the Thunderbolt Division. He was at the same level as Li Zhonghu in the Border Control Corps. He kept a low profile in the Snowdance Corps and worked as Li Zhonghu's deputy peacefully. He was a man of few words, but as soon as he spoke, he immediately attracted everyone's attention. Other forces. Li Tianlan repeated it, not a question. Heroes Club, Shadow Throne, Men in Black, Dark Knights, Vatican, Fantasy World. Sun Mingran said, these are the biggest forces. In addition, there is information that the Morton family and the Violet family are also ready to make trouble. As for the forces that have secretly sneaked into Reki City, there are countless. Recently we have been very low-key in Reki City, but the activities of the major forces are very frequent. Li Tianlan nodded and suddenly looked at President Rieker. Are the higher-ups stable? Rick thought about it seriously for a while. This question was very serious. If he didn't answer it well, it would lead to serious consequences. Rick went through all the higher-ups in his mind and said, there won't be any problems for the time being. Now, except for Prime Minister Rieker, who clearly stood by Li Tianlan's side, the attitudes of the senior officials of Wulon State were relatively subtle. They might not be 100% loyal to Zhongzhou State, but they would not be drawn over by other forces in a short time. Now that Li Tianlan had woken up, the possibility was even lower. However, whether the senior officials of Wulon State would change their stance or not depended on what Li Tianlan would do after he woke up. For now. Yes, for now, Li Tianlan nodded. That is to say, after a long time the higher-ups will be unstable? If that's the case then. There was a sudden knock on the door. Dongqing Rushi walked into the conference room with sleepy eyes. She rubbed her eyes, held the phone in her hand and said softly, phone. She walked up to Li Tianlan. In public her address was also very formal. Minister Dongqing's. Li Tianlan's heart moved slightly. He took the phone, stood up and walked to the door of the conference room. When he was about to go out, he suddenly looked back at Qin Shilai and asked, what did the Qin clan say? We will do our best to stop the power of Morton and the Violet family. Qin Shilai responded calmly. This was undoubtedly a very difficult task. Both the Violet and Morton families had invincible realm experts, and their resources were by no means comparable to the weakest Rekvia. If the two families practiced and entered Reki City, it would be difficult for the Qin clan to resist them alone. But in the current situation, only the Qin clan was responsible for stopping the Violet and Morton families. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and glanced at the conference room. Tostel, the second in command of Wulan State and the new patriarch of Rekvia, was not in the conference room. "Contact the Rekvia family," Li Tianlan said. Qin Shilai nodded, but he did not look relaxed at all. This was what many people wanted to say but had never said. With Li Tianlan taking over Wulan State and Rekvia, the position of Tostel, the new patriarch of the Rekvia family, could be said to be very firm. But the change of the highest power of Rekvia was not logical. After the death of Patriarch Schenker, the entire Rekvia family was in turmoil. Tostel's move only took the lead, but it might not be able to really bear the burden. Now, with all the major forces entering Reki City as the former dominator of Wulan State, the Rekvia family was naturally the target of all forces. Tostel's position remained unchanged, but no one was sure what other real power figures of the Rekvia family thought now. It was impossible for Li Tianlan not to know this. But he still wanted to pull the Rekvia family to the side of the Qin clan, which showed that his mind was still very clear. To resist foreign aggression, one must first settle the internal affairs. Li Tianlan's move seemed to indicate that he was going to attack the Rekvia family. The strength of a cleaned-up Rekvia might be greatly reduced, but the foundation of the four major families in Eastern Europe was here. If Rekvia fully cooperated with the Qin clan, it would be easier for the Qin clan to face the Violet family and the Morton family. In addition, make an appointment for me with the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, Angel and Arcis. Li Tianlan continued. Leave this matter to me. Cool Breeze said. Li Tianlan glanced at him and suddenly remembered the rumor between Tribulation and Angel. He nodded thoughtfully and continued, finally, in the name of the Snowdance Corps, send a notice to all the major forces. I don't care whether they are the Heroes Club or the Men in Black. 1 week, I will give them 1 week. All the forces must get out of Reki City within 1 week. Otherwise, I don't mind taking the Snowdance Corps to have a heart-to-heart talk with them. The atmosphere in the conference room exploded. Li Zhonghu laughed and beamed with joy. Even Prime Minister Riker's face was flushed with excitement. Let all the dark forces get out of Reki City within a week. How was this a notice? It was completely the last warning. It was indeed a good thing to follow such a marshal. Li Tianlan was still calm. There was no disturbance in his heart. In his opinion, Reki City was already his territory, and all the major forces were not his welcome guests, so it was a matter of course to let them get out. He turned around, walked out of the conference room, and went straight to the study of the office of the president. No one had used the study since Carlos' death, but it was very clean. Li Tianlan turned on the screen of the study, connected the mobile phone, and sent a video to Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi had been waiting for Li Tianlan's call. As soon as Li Tianlan's video was dialed, the smiling face of the former god of massacre of Zhongzhou State appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Marshal. Li Tianlan raised his hand and saluted solemnly. This child, why are you so polite? Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and smiled. Looking at Li Tianlan, who was full of energy, his smile was happy and satisfied. How is your injury? It's almost healed. It doesn't affect my combat effectiveness. Li Tianlan told the truth. Now there was still a short distance for his injury to be completely healed. But in the case that one wind and thunder vein was half useless, his speed, strength, and sword intent could barely be compatible. In other words, if Li Tianlan did not pursue the ultimate perfection, when he recovered from his injury, he could give up this wind and thunder vein and break through to the invincible realm with a single wind and thunder vein. In this state, Li Tianlan's potential might decline, but his actual combat effectiveness was slightly stronger than before he was injured. That's good. Dongqing Wudi nodded. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was calm and composed in a military uniform in the video. His eyes were a little dazed and he seemed to think of something. You handled the matter of Wulan State very well. It couldn't be more perfect. Dongqing Wudi's voice grew softer, and there was undisguised appreciation in his words. Have you talked to Riker? Li Tianlan nodded and asked. Before he fell into a coma, he asked for compensation from Wulan State and an apology from Riker. All these requests were actually nothing. What really mattered was the negotiation between Zhongzhou State and Wulan State. Compared with his requests from the standpoint of Wulan State, Riker's negotiation with Zhongzhou State was a real surrender and humiliation of the country. These 4 words could also show the benefits that Zhongzhou State was about to get. Although Li Tianlan could represent Zhongzhou State, he was not good at this kind of negotiation. Prime Minister Riker killed Carlos, and Rekvia walked into the arms of Zhongzhou state. In this case, the bottom line of Wulan state had been so low that there was no bottom line. He naturally threw the problem of how to maximize the benefits of Wulan state to the top of Zhongzhou state. It had been 10 days since he fell into a coma. At this time, the negotiation between Zhongzhou state and Wulan state should have been settled. Yes. Dong Qingwudi's smile grew wider. Riker has agreed to share all the resources of Wulan state with Zhongzhou state, as well as to provide permanent garrison bases and trillions of Zhongzhou dollars in reparations. In addition, Wulan state's political position has also made major adjustments. From then on, it has begun to tilt toward Zhongzhou state. The treaty will be signed soon. After the treaty is signed, citizens of Zhongzhou state do not need to apply for immigration to Wulan state, and the people between the two countries can marry freely. His smile was a little weird. There are so many beautiful women in Wulan state. Boy, you've created benefits for those single guys in the Border Control Corps. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and wanted to laugh, but he was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Not to mention other conditions, just the first one was scary enough. Sharing all the resources of Wulan state with Zhongzhou state. And it was unconditional sharing. Wulan state was a resource-rich country. It had a land area second only to Snow country in the whole of Europe and equivalent to that of France. It was rich in more than beautiful women. This fertile land was almost full of resources: oil, natural gas, a lot of minerals, metals, and the most important, food. What did it mean to share all these with Zhongzhou state? If the two countries married freely 100 years later, who could be sure that the people walking in the streets and alleys of Wulan state were from Zhongzhou state or Wulan state? Do you understand? Dong Qingwudi asked with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded silently. For a moment he didn't know how to express his feelings. Wulan state has always been a sore point of Zhongzhou state. This time you solved the problem of Wulan state, and we got back all the investment in Wulan state at one time. Now the whole Wulan state is related to the development of Zhongzhou state in the next 100 years. All this situation is thanks to you. Tianlan, this is a real great contribution. On behalf of Zhongzhou state, I want to thank you and the Li family. Dong Qingwudi's expression gradually became serious. He stood up and gave Li Tianlan a military salute with a solemn expression. Li Tianlan shook his head with a wry smile and returned the salute. After a moment of silence, he asked, "When will the treaty be signed?" "The time is set for a week later. You must attend at that time. In Zhongzhou state, President Li Huaqing will personally go to Wulan state to sign a treaty with Prime Minister Riker. At that time, you must protect the safety of Mr. President," Dong Qingwudi said slowly. Li Tianlan nodded and said, Dong Qingwudi sat down, lit a cigarette and said calmly, "In addition, there is a large delegation following the president. I'll send you the list later. There are many people. You can get in touch with them. Rushi also knows them. She will introduce them to you at that time." Li Tianlan froze and carefully looked at Dong Qingwudi's expression. The screen in front of him was very clear. Across the screen, across thousands of mountains and rivers, Li Tianlan vaguely saw the faint exhaustion and joy in Dong Qingwudi's eyes. "General," at this moment, Li Tianlan really had 1,000 words in his heart, but he could not express them. Even a fool could understand the meaning of Dong Qingwudi's words. Wulan state was the country that Li Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps had conquered. Li Tianlan was the candidate strongly supported by the giant group. The most elite troops under Dong Qingwudi's command were all left to Li Tianlan, except for the part that had to be traded out because of the general trend. This time, when Li Tianlan entered Eastern Europe, the giant group took unprecedented risks and invested unprecedented amounts. Now Li Tianlan had conquered Wulan state. When it was time to share the fruits of victory, most of such a large piece of cake would naturally belong to the giant group. This was Li Tianlan's Wulan state, Zhongzhou state, and also Wulan state of the giant group. This was the naked interest. That was why Wang Tianzong, the Sword Emperor, could not let go of Wulan state. In the current situation, whoever occupied Wulan state had the qualification to divide the interests of Wulan state. Li Tianlan was already supreme in Wulan state. The giant group naturally became the biggest winner. Other groups might also want to get involved, but to put it bluntly, they were not qualified. Even if they forced themselves to participate, Li Tianlan was still here, and the interests were in his hands. He could give it to whoever he wanted. So Li Tianlan could imagine the position of the delegation that followed Li Huaqing to Wulan state. Not everyone in the delegation might belong to the giant group. But most people must belong to the giant group. This was the most basic rule. Li Tianlan was in Wulan State. This was a feast that Li Tianlan fought for the giant group. This was his reward for the giant group in the Dongqing clan. But Dongqing Wudi now wanted to give this list to Li Tianlan, and even asked Li Tianlan to have more contact with these people with Dongqing Rushi's company. The meaning of this sentence was very obscure, but it was also very clear. This was going to take over? Replace Dongqing Wudi to take over the entire giant group? Li Tianlan had mixed feelings. If all this went well, when the chaos in Eastern Europe ended and he returned to Zhongzhou State, he would become the most powerful person in Zhongzhou State, whether he was the marshal of the Snowdance Corps or not. What was his identity as one of the helmsmen of the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State? Marshal, I don't seem to be mentally prepared for this. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said dryly, "It doesn't matter." Dongqing Wudi laughed. Whether internally or externally from the dark world to the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi, the marshal of Zhongzhou State, left everyone with the impression that he was calm, dignified, energetic, decisive, and tough. This was the impression of Dongqing Wudi in everyone's mind. But now, with his smile, Li Tianlan clearly felt the old age and warmth under Dongqing Wudi's smile. Tianlan, this is a very good opportunity. If Eastern Europe is a cake, you are the cake master. If everyone wants to eat the cake, they must look at your face. When they ask you for help, it is undoubtedly the best time to get in touch with them. You will take charge of the giant group in the future, and now is the best opportunity to integrate. And you have to do more than just integrate. You have to be a leader. You have to make them feel that you are their leader when you enter the giant group. Don't worry, the giant group is very big and loose. This time, those who follow the president to Wulan State can be said to be the direct descendants of our 3 families. If they recognize me, they will recognize you. You may not be ready to take over my position now, but it's time to leave an impression on them. I will help him. Dongqing Rushi's voice sounded clean and clear. Dongqing Wudi looked at Dongqing Rushi and then at Li Tianlan. Finally, he couldn't help laughing. His laughter was gratified and hearty, like a spring rain in Li Tianlan's heart, moistening things silently. I'll send you the list right away. Dongqing Wudi said with a smile. Tianlan, you don't have to be so polite and don't say thank you. I don't like it. We all think highly of you and Rushi. Treat her well. When you need it, she will help you. Li Tianlan nodded with a complicated heart. He had long thought about the arrival of this day. He had thought about it during the final maneuver of the Sky Academy. But he had never thought that this day would come so soon. Dongqing Wudi couldn't wait to send the giant group to him, give him power and status and let him rise. If all these were Dongqing Rushi's dowry, then the dowry was too rich. And Dongqing Wudi said we. Obviously this we did not refer to the elders of the Dongqing clan. It was the 3 pillar families of the giant group. Dongqing, the Zhou family and the Bai family. Although the 3 families were very close, Li Tianlan couldn't figure out why the Dongqing clan recognized him, and the other 2 families also recognized him. So when the Dongqing clan wanted to send the giant group to him, he didn't even hear any objection from the 2 families. Was the giant group really so generous? The call, which was destined to have a far-reaching impact, ended in silence. In the office of the army headquarters, Dongqing Wudi put out the cigarette but in his hand, still with a smile on his face. Are you going to let Tianlan take over? General Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, asked softly. There was no objection in his tone, but a little hesitant. Is it too urgent? No hurry. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. This is the best opportunity. The opportunity is good, but aren't you afraid of stimulating Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun by doing this? Even the prince group can't sit still, right? Bai Qingzhao said. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and shook his head. It doesn't matter. He said slowly, even if I don't stimulate them, they will still do what they want to do. These so-called stimuli won't affect any of their decisions at all. And, no matter what, Tianlan will win. What if? Bai Qingzhao lowered his head and took a drag on his cigarette. His voice was a little vague. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and said blandly, if there is really an accident, I will resign from the position of the Minister of the Army Headquarters. Bai Qingzhao was stunned for a while, then shook his head with a wry smile. You think too simply. How can it be so simple? It's not necessarily difficult. The point is that I never thought about this what if. Dongqing Wudi looked at his brother-in-law and said calmly, don't worry, it will be fine. It was not until Dongqing Rushi pulled Li Tianlan's palm that he suddenly reacted. The video call in front of him had already been hung up. Dongqing Rushi stood beside him, gazed into his eyes and said softly, "Are you unhappy?" "What? How can I be unhappy?" Li Tianlan reached out and pinched Dongqing Rushi's delicate little nose. "I just can't wrap my head around it for a while. It's hard for me to describe my current mood. In short, it's very complicated." "It's okay." Dongqing Rushi held Li Tianlan's palm. "I will help you." Li Tianlan smiled. When he was about to speak, the door of the study was suddenly knocked on. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said, "Come in." The door was pushed open. Prime Minister Rieker, who looked calm, came in and said respectfully, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded and said in surprise, "What's the matter?" "Carlos's wife and daughter are dead," Rieker reported softly. Li Tianlan froze in place. After a while he said, There was a fire in their temporary residence. After investigation it was found to be an accident." Rieker's tone was a little erratic. Li Tianlan said, "Oh." His tone was also a little erratic. Carlos's family had been living in the office of the president before. After Carlos's death they all moved out. It had only been a few days. "Take care of him," Li Tianlan said halfway and suddenly found that he could not go on. He narrowed his eyes, looked at Rieker, whose face was stiff, and did not speak for a long time. Rieker continued to say in that flat voice, "Your Highness, Carlos has no family. He has a younger brother who does business in Wulan State. A week ago we found that he was suspected of serious tax evasion. In the process of summoning him, his bodyguard resisted with a gun. Then he tried to flee to England with his family. The family of 3 was shot dead on the spot. Carlos's mother couldn't stand the blow. She had a heart attack and died 5 days ago. Today is the funeral of Carlos's mother. After the funeral, Carlos's wife and daughter also had an accident." His voice was calm as if he was giving a work report. But Li Tianlan's face gradually became pale. He did not feel that he was soft-hearted. But after the tragic game, the result of the victory and defeat was so clearly and cruelly presented in front of him for the first time, and the impact on him was extremely fierce. His younger brother's family of 3, his wife and daughter, and his mother, with the death of Carlos, all of this was completely torn apart by the world. It was cruel and cold without any warmth. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little scared. Because he thought of himself. He could be sure that if he failed in Eastern Europe and died in Reki City or anywhere else in Eastern Europe, then everyone in the Li family and the Dongqing clan would end up even more miserable than Carlos's family. Dongqing Wudi and Dongqing Rushi were among them. By Qingqian and all the others. The mountain was high and the road was dangerous. People who stood at a high place often carried too much on their backs. So Li Tianlan could not lose. He stood beside Dongqing Rushi and his body was trembling slightly. But he looked at Rieker with a pale face and a poker face. Rieker lowered his head lower and lower. After a long time, Li Tianlan nodded and said with a poker face, "Got it? You can go out." Rieker bowed deeply to Li Tianlan and turned to leave. When he walked to the door, Li Tianlan suddenly said, "Wait." Rieker turned around and looked at Li Tianlan in confusion. Then he heard Li Tianlan's question. "How many troops can you mobilize in Reki City?" Chapter 478. Was not far from Reki City. The distance of a few hundred kilometers was only a few hours of driving at full speed. Therefore Qin Shinghuan, the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps, came very quickly. When he drove the military off-road vehicle of the Arctic Ocean Command at full speed and entered Reki City, he did not know what would happen next. The ignorant are fearless. Qin Shinghuan was not only ignorant but also ambitious. Qin Shinghuan's military career began in the Beihai province, and he had advanced step by step within the Beihai Corps. The Wang family of Beihai could be said to be the strongest superpower in the entire Dark World. This is a matter of public acceptance. It was recognized for many reasons. For example, Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong was the best in the world. The Wang family of Beihai had a strong foundation. The kendo of the Wang family of Beihai almost represented the peak of the Dark World, and the Wang family of Beihai occupied Beihai province but controlled a supergroup that could influence Zhongzhou state. These are all reasons. But the most important reason was that the Wang family of Beihai owned Beihai province and the Beihai Corps. The North Sea province was surnamed Wang. This was the case both on the surface and in reality. The Beihai Corps was the strongest force in the Wang family of Beihai that could look down on the entire Dark World. The Demonic Legion was very mysterious, and the Heaven Punishing Squad was very powerful, but all of them were inferior to the North Sea Legion. Because of the number of people. The entire Beihai Corps had 350,000 soldiers, including the sea, land, and air forces, and was equipped with the world's most advanced weapons and armaments. In times of need, a military order from Mount Dibing could even gather millions of troops within a week and be equipped with the most complete weapons and equipment. What did this mean? This was a destructive force that could tear anything apart. Among all the super dark forces in the world, only the Wang family of Beihai had hundreds of thousands of the most elite troops on the surface. It was placed in the open. Only on the surface. This kind of power was so powerful that it was no exaggeration to say that even if Wang Tianzong died in Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai would not fall as long as the Beihai Corps did not fall. There were many experts in the Beihai Corps, which was the real power that made Mount Dibing as stable as Mount Tai. It was exactly because of this that Qin Shi Huang was having a very difficult time in the North Sea Legion. He already held quite a high position in the North Sea Legion, but many people were wary of him due to his stance, and some of them didn't even dare to open up to him. Because he was Wang Qinglei's confidant. The Wang consortium was huge. There were many internal branches. Each branch had its own position in Beihai and even in Mount Dibing. However, Wang Tianzong had always held the most important North Sea Corps tightly in his hands. More than 80% of the middle and senior officers of the Beihai Corps only had eyes for Wang Tianzong. Under such circumstances, it was naturally quite difficult for Wang Qinglei's trusted aide, Qin Shi Huang, to survive in the North Sea Legion. Wang Qinglei's status had become more and more important in recent years. The divergence between him and Wang Tianzong gradually became obvious. But before everything was made public, no one said anything on the surface. Wang Tianzong had never expressed any opinion about Qin Shi Huang being in the Beihai Corps. It was only when the chaos in Eastern Europe happened that Wang Tianzong found an opportunity to transfer him out of the Beihai Corps and into the Snowdance Corps, the vice-marshal of the largest special warfare battalion in Zhongzhou State. A position with infinite possibilities. Qin Shi Huang was overjoyed, and Wang Qinglei also acquiesced to this arrangement. After this transfer was successful, Qin Shi Huang's position in the North Sea Legion was naturally taken over by Wang Tianzong's confidant, and Wang Qinglei didn't say anything either. So in this transfer, the two giants of the Wang family of Beihai reached a silent agreement. Both Wang Tianzong and Wang Qinglei hoped that Qin Shi Huang would make Li Tianlan a mere figurehead in the Snowdance Corps and take control of this special warfare battalion. Qin Shi Huang was placed high hopes on him. While he was under great pressure, he was constantly looking for opportunities. Li Tianlan's serious injury and coma were the best opportunity for him. But at the beginning he could still sit still and observe the situation calmly in Im. But as the rumors in the outside world gradually rose, Qin Shi Huang's ambition began to expand. All of Eastern Europe was spreading that Li Tianlan's injury was too serious and his foundation was completely lost. There were even rumors that Li Tianlan had died. Qin Shi Huang's own strength was only half a step away from the half-step invincible realm. He didn't believe that Li Tianlan's foundation would be completely destroyed. However, he would not be optimistic about Li Tianlan's injury. He had not officially entered the invincible realm. But he killed 2 invincible realm experts in a day. How could such a serious injury be cured so easily? Qin Shi Huang conservatively estimated that Li Tianlan would need at least half a year to recuperate to restore a certain degree of combat capability. And there were more and more rumors in the outside world. Li Tianlan was still in a coma. This further proved Qin Shi Huang's guess. He waited patiently for 10 days. Just when his patience was running out, he finally couldn't help but directly dial the phone of Drifting Cloud, the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps. If the morale of the army was unstable, everything would not go smoothly. The commander was seriously injured and in a coma, and the deputy commander temporarily took control of the overall situation. This reason was absolutely logical. No one could stop him from going to Reki City. His strength in the Snowdance Corps was weak, and only about 5,000 people obeyed his command, which gave him a headache. Even if he forcibly drove Li Zhonghu out of Reki City with a military order after taking control of the situation, the 5,000 people who belonged to him were still a little empty in Reki City. So he needed Wang Tianzong's strong support. This was also the key reason why Qin Shi Huang couldn't wait to come to Im. The 5,000 elites of Im were ready to go. Qin Shi Huang rushed to the Caesar Hotel in Reki City almost without hesitation. It was still raining in Eastern Europe, messy and cold. Qin Shi Huang, who was travel-worn, felt something was wrong as soon as he walked into the hall. The hall of the Caesar Hotel was very luxurious, but the magnificent space was a little cold and quiet. In the rest area, some seemingly unrelated Caucasians were sitting on the sofa and chatting in a low voice. The moment Qin Xinghuan came in, almost everyone's eyes stayed on him quietly for a moment. A very subtle feeling emerged in Qin Xinghuan's heart. It was like a feeling of being surrounded. "I'm sorry, sir, the hotel is full. I suggest you," the extremely hot and seductive receptionist spoke with a smile. But before she finished speaking, Qin Xinghuan had interrupted her. "I'm not staying in the hotel. I'm looking for someone." The smile of the receptionist at the front desk faded a little and she looked at Qin Xinghuan with some confusion. "I'm looking for someone who lives in 20, Vice Marshal Qin?" A voice suddenly sounded behind Qin Xinghuan. Qin Xinghuan turned around in confusion and saw a middle-aged woman in the uniform of the lobby manager coming over. Qin Xinghuan felt that she was a little familiar, but he forgot where he had seen her. The middle-aged but still dignified and elegant woman took the initiative to reach out her hand and said with a smile, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Poppy from the Shadow Throne. Now I'm the manager of the Caesar Hotel." Poppy. Qin Xinghuan suddenly remembered and knew the origin of the other party. At this time, looking at the white men and women in the hall, he suddenly realized something. "Has this place been occupied by the Shadow Throne?" Qin Xinghuan laughed. "The queen doesn't like to have too many strangers around her, so she temporarily cleared the place. Now this is the place where the Shadow Throne is stationed." Poppy shook Qin Xinghuan's hand and said, "The queen already knows your intention, but you may have to wait a little. Now His Majesty the Sword Emperor is entertaining an important guest and may not have time to see you for the time being." Qin Xinghuan frowned and looked out of the hotel. The street outside the hotel was lit up. The sky gradually darkened and the wind and rain continued. "But I also have something very important to see His Majesty," Qin Xinghuan said. "Trust me," Poppy said softly, "the guest His Majesty is entertaining is more important than anything else. Besides, it won't take long. Come with me." For Wang Tianzong, the most important person for him at this stage was the person who could break the deadlock in Eastern Europe. And at this moment, in front of him was the person who had the ability to break the deadlock. The lights in the luxurious hotel suite were warm and bright. Wang Tianzong, dressed in a casual suit, sat on the sofa and looked at the opposite side quietly. Opposite him sat a very tall and burly tramp. The tramp's body was majestic and very dirty at the same time. His clothes seemed to have not been washed for a long time. After being drenched by the rain, they had a very strange smell. There was a tea table between him and Wang Tianzong. The tea table was full of food. Fresh and tender steak, good foie gras, caviar, salad, bread slices. Wang Tianzong was looking at the tramp. The tramp was almost lying on the tea table. All the food on the coffee table was swept away like a whirlwind. The second dining cart was pushed up. The food was served and disappeared like running water. Wang Tianzong quietly watched the tramp wolf down the food with a curious look, as if he was looking at some interesting scenery. "Are you very strange?" the tramp suddenly said vaguely. He did not look up and his tone was very casual. But between the lines, there was an extremely naked indifference and majesty. "If you were me, wouldn't you feel strange? Tyrant, who ranked 7th on the divine list, should have such a day. Who could have thought of it without seeing this scene with their own eyes?" The one opposite Wang Tianzong was Tyrant. Wang Tianzong spent the whole afternoon thinking about Samsara and Qin Weibai. He knew that some speculations might be ridiculous. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was the most likely. Just when he really couldn't help but let the Shadow Throne break the game first, Xianming finally brought the news of Tyrant. Wang Tianzong's luck had always been good. It was the same this time. With the clear news, Xianming acted quickly. In less than 2 hours, Tyrant was invited to the Caesar Hotel, in Wang Tianzong's room. Tyrant seemed to snort coldly, but he did not speak. He just concentrated on the food in front of him. "How did you end up like this? With your skills, if you didn't die, you shouldn't be so embarrassed." "What do you know?" Tyrant clenched his fist and slammed it on the tea table. The tea table did not move. But the whole hotel seemed to shake. Wang Tianzong said yes and raised his voice. Tyrant gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. "In the battle with the master of Samsara Palace that day, I was seriously injured. Although I barely escaped, the Samsara Palace has never stopped chasing me. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't have believed that the Samsara Palace has such a terrifying power in Eastern Europe. And they have something to do with the Qin clan. The Samsara Palace is looking for me, and the Qin clan is also looking for me. The Violet clan and the Morton clan don't know the inside story, and they are also looking for me. Now there are countless people tracking my whereabouts in every country in Eastern Europe. Do you think I want to be in such a disgusting situation? Tyrant's tone was full of deep resentment. While he was talking, he ate 2 more steaks. The person who hurt you is the master of Samsara Palace? Wang Tianzong said thoughtfully. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. That bitch. Tyrant growled in a cold tone. The master of Samsara Palace? Wang Tianzong hesitated for a while and suddenly asked, what happened? Few people in the dark world had seen the master of Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong had met her. They even confronted each other. But the strange thing was that it was difficult for Wang Tianzong to determine the specific realm of the master of Samsara Palace. More than 3 years ago, the master of Samsara Palace led the 12 super masters of Samsara to Mount Dibing. At that time, Wang Tianzong felt that the state of the master of Samsara Palace was very strange. The other party's realm had been fluctuating around the peak of the invincible realm, and it was extremely unstable. Normally, such a state was almost impossible, but it was not absolutely impossible. At least there was such a person around Wang Tianzong. Summer solstice. Could it be that the master of Samsara Palace was also a person who had lost all her foundation? If not, how could her realm fluctuate so obviously? Tyrant stopped eating for a while. His eyes were still filled with rage, but he became serious. The peak of the invincible realm. Tyrant said, she is definitely at the peak of the invincible realm. It can't be wrong. Wang Tianzong said, oh. There were very few invincible realm experts in the dark world. There were even fewer experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Normally, the experts at the peak of the invincible realm were the top 5 on the divine list. However, in the last few decades, the quality of the divine list had shrunk slightly so that Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou state, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, also squeezed into the top 5. Tyrant was actually very close to this level. He had a clear fight with the master of Samsara Palace. It was impossible for his judgment of the other party to be wrong. But Wang Tianzong shook his head. There was no relief in his eyes. Instead, he became more and more confused. She is very cunning and powerful, but her sword intent is a little strange. I can't tell the feeling, but it's very strange. If that wasn't the case, how could I have lost so miserably? Bitch. That bitch. Tyrant clenched his fists angrily. You have resentment. Wang Tianzong laughed. Tyrant snorted and didn't say anything. It's good to have resentment. Wang Tianzong continued, I need your resentment. Why don't you and I cooperate? In the current situation, I need your help twice. Tyrant buried his head in eating and didn't seem to hear Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong took out a small bottle and put it in front of Tyrant. There's a balance here. You should have heard of this medicine. It can help you recover most of your injuries in the shortest time. It's one of the core potions of the Wang family of Beihai. The balance bottle was very small. The potion inside showed a strange light blue color. Under the light, it looked extremely magnificent. Tyrant ate without saying a word. He did not even look at the extremely precious balance that was similar to a legendary balance in the dark world. The gene potion technology of the Wang family of Beihai was absolutely powerful. But no matter how powerful their technology in this aspect was, the medicine that could help an invincible realm expert on the divine list recover most of his injuries in a short time was not something that the Wang family of Beihai could casually make. Balance had always been a legend in the dark world. Maybe it couldn't compare with the Immortal series, but it was also extremely precious. It appeared twice on the black market and was sold at a sky-high price of more than 11 figures. What followed was also a reign of terror. It was no exaggeration to say that this bottle of balance meant the extra life of an invincible realm expert on the divine list. The life of an invincible realm expert on the divine list was naturally worth 11 figures. Indefinite grace is with me. Wang Tianzong continued, within 3 days indefinite grace will be handed over to you. By then your injury should be almost healed. I need you to break the current deadlock in Eastern Europe with the strength of your heyday and help me in the final battle. Tyrant's eating speed gradually slowed down. He looked at the balance in front of the table, then raised his head and glanced at Wang Tianzong. He uttered a syllable. Facing Tyrant, Wang Tianzong reached out his hand. His palm was full of calluses. It didn't look like the hand of a peerless patriarch of a wealthy family. It looked very old, but it was also very powerful. After the chaos ends, if I can seize Eastern Europe, I will hand over everything in Eastern Europe to you. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. Tyrant's body shook. If Wang Tianzong could really seize Eastern Europe, Then everything that Tyrant would take care of would be another Polar Ground Alliance. But it was not the Polar Ground Alliance in Eastern Europe. It was the Polar Ground Alliance in Beihai. Tyrant took a deep breath and reached out with both hands. He held Wang Tianzong's palm with one hand. Then he grabbed the bottle of balance with the other hand. "I will take action," Tyrant said in a solemn and serious tone. Wang Tianzong nodded and suddenly reminded him, "You should take a bath." The wind and rain were getting cooler. In the water restaurant in the office of the president, Li Tianlan was having dinner with Holy Virgin Angel of the Vatican. Her Highness the Holy Virgin, who was second only to one person in the Vatican, was still wearing a white veil, mysterious and noble. A few male gods' punishment priests stood behind Angel with solemn and serious expressions. Li Tianlan had an appointment with Angel and Arsis. But the latter seemed to want to maintain his dignity as the third on the divine list and did not show up. Li Tianlan didn't care. He cut the steak in front of him casually and said with a chuckle, "Your Highness the Holy Virgin, what does the Vatican think of the current situation in Reiki City? It's too chaotic and we can't see the way forward." Angel said with a smile and a soft voice. Li Tianlan nodded and suddenly said, "I don't like chaos. Chaos means darkness. We are all God's people and should be bathed in light. From this point of view, Your Highness, you are very suitable for our faith." Angel's smile was soft and holy. "Your Highness, do you have a faith?" "No," Li Tianlan said slowly, "but it is said that the new stream has been developing very well in Zhongzhou State in recent years. They are all pagans." Angel said softly. Her voice was extremely steady and soft. However, the eyes of several holy punishment priests behind her turned cold when they heard the new stream. "What about Wulan State?" Li Tianlan asked. "As far as I know, many people in Wulan State are believers of the Eastern Church. It seems that when the Patriarch visited Wulan State, there were cheers in Reiki City for a long time." "Tut!" Li Tianlan shook his head with a smile. "Those are poor people who have gone astray. I came here on behalf of the Vatican in the hope that they can change their faith. Only the Vatican is the only spokesperson of God in the world." Angel's voice was soft and weak. But there had never been such a gentle method to change one's faith since ancient times. Li Tianlan lowered his eyes and ate. He said calmly, "I can help you." "Thank you, Your Highness." Angel laughed and seemed to be very happy. Li Tianlan said no more and just concentrated on the steak in front of him. Angel was silent for a while and suddenly said, "Your Highness, the Vatican has always been very sincere about bringing friends. We will not let Your Highness help us for free. We will give Your Highness enough compensation." "What do you need, Your Highness?" "I need Arsis to do something for me once," Li Tianlan said. Angel frowned and said nothing. The geographical location of Wulan State was extremely important. It was one of the core places where the Vatican spread its faith. With Li Tianlan's current power in Wulan State, if he was willing to help, it would be easy for the Vatican to change the faith of the entire Wulan State. Such help from the other party was indeed worthy of Arisis's help. Angel thought for a moment and asked, "When is it?" "Tonight." Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but as he spoke, a gust of cold wind seemed to blow through the entire office of the president. "Tonight." Now it seemed to be night already. Angel's body trembled slightly and she asked subconsciously, "To whom?" Li Tianlan did not speak. "Time seems to be a little rushed." Angel frowned and said, "There are many things that can't be arranged in time. It must be tonight." Li Tianlan became calmer and calmer. Angel fell silent as if she was calculating something silently. For the theocracy of Wulan State and several countries around Wulan State, it was not a big problem for Arsis to take action. But as she said, it was indeed inappropriate to take action in such a hurry tonight. Li Tianlan took a sip of red wine. As soon as he picked up the knife and fork, the mobile phone in his pocket suddenly vibrated. Li Tianlan froze and took out his mobile phone. It was not a phone call but a text message. "Tianlan, I'm in Reiki City." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. He was silent for a long time before he replied with a text message. This text message was a little long, and he pressed the screen for nearly a minute. Angel quietly watched Li Tianlan send text messages. "An elder." After sending the text message, Li Tianlan casually explained. Without waiting for Angel to speak, he continued, "Arsis cannot take action, but Mellad, the vice commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, and 100 elite soldiers of the Holy Disarmament Corps have to help me tonight." "Your Highness." Angel took a deep breath and solemnly said, "I can agree to your request, but you must tell me, Where do you want the elites of the Vatican to go tonight? Li Tianlan lowered his head, finished the last piece of steak and said calmly, the Caesar Hotel. Chapter 479. In the Caesar Hotel. Qin Qinghuan, who could almost be said to have spent every second as long as a year, finally saw Wang Tianzong. Tyrant had left. He was seriously injured. As an invincible realm expert on the divine list, he was like a tramp. It could be imagined how weak his combat capability was. Tyrant did not believe in the Shadow Throne, so Wang Tianzong gave him the address of a small secret base established by the Wang family of Beihai in Eastern Europe. With that balance, Tyrant's injury could be completely stabilized in just a few days. At that time, Tyrant with indefinite grace would be even more terrifying than when he was in the Polar Ground Alliance. He already had a chess piece to break the game. And it was a chess piece that could be controlled. Wang Tianzong could use Tyrant to create all the situations he needed. He was completely relieved and in a good mood. When he saw Qin Qinghuan, he even got up and shook hands with Qin Qinghuan. Even though Qin Qinghuan was a general of Zhongzhou state, he was flattered by such treatment, so he behaved more respectfully and cautiously. Naturally, he did not know what Wang Tianzong was thinking. But if he wanted to control the Snowdance Corps, it would not do any harm to the Wang family of Beihai at present. The identity of Wang Qinglei's confidant might make Wang Tianzong hesitate, but when Wang Tianzong sent him to the Snowdance Corps, he must have made such a plan. All the reasons were there, but Qin Qinghuan was still a little worried about gains and losses. He had made up his mind. If this trip was successful, he would make Li Tianlan a mere figurehead. He did not mind giving up some control of the Snowdance Corps at all. At that time, he would let Wang Tianzong's confidant come over to take over several important positions. Now seeing the smile on Wang Tianzong's face, Qin Qinghuan felt relieved, but he had no time to say anything else. After all, the situation in Reki City was extremely tense, and time was more important than anything else. Li Tianlan's injury might not be cured in a short time, but the mobilization of the Snowdance Corps needed to race against time. Although Qin Qinghuan was in Im and could not see the situation in Reki City clearly, at least he knew that as the strongest party, the Wang family of Beihai needed to break the current situation as soon as possible. So the sooner he took down the Snowdance Corps, the more he could cooperate with Wang Tianzong. Your Majesty. Qin Qinghuan didn't even have time to sit down completely before he said directly, to be honest, I hesitated for a long time when I came to Reki City today. 10 days ago, I spoke to Marshal Li on the phone. Marshal Li ordered me to stabilize the rear and defend Im. It was a strict order. But the situation has been getting worse recently. I heard that other dark forces have even begun to harass the Snowdance Corps and Marshal Li has been unconscious. Finally, I decided to come here. After all, Marshal Li is unconscious, and I should shoulder the Li's vice-marshal. Responsible. Qinggu, Wang Tianzong nodded with a smile, threw a cigarette to Qin Qinghuan, and suddenly said, do you know that you came 2 days later than I expected? Qin was shocked and Qin as alias Qingluan, said Tianas Qin Qinglian as a. The corner of his mouth twitched and he said with a wry smile, I hesitated. After all, Marshal Li's order was on my head, so I had to consider it carefully. Wang Yu Qing. Qinghuan to say Li Qin Li Qinghuan Ling said he. Done. Qin Qinghuan was silent for a while. He suddenly stood up as if he had made up his mind, and bowed deeply to Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong looked at Qin Qinghuan calmly. Your Majesty, I'm incompetent. I'm ashamed of Zhongzhou State and Beihai. Now Marshal Li is in a coma, and I'm ambitious but not talented. In the face of the chaos in Reki City, even if I'm willing to do my best, I'm afraid I can't support the overall situation. I know that Your Majesty has a lot of things to do, but the situation is critical. Qinghuan still has a presumptuous request. If possible, I hope that Your Majesty can temporarily go to the office of the President to preside over the overall situation for the sake of Zhongzhou State and the Snowdance Corps. I'm the Vice-Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Today, I'm standing here to invite Your Majesty to the office of the President. Wang Tianzong quietly looked at Qin Qinghuan, who was sincere. After a while, he asked, Are you inviting me? On behalf of every warrior of the Snowdance Corps, I invite Your Majesty. On behalf of everyone in the Snowdance Corps. In other words, Li Tianlan was also represented by Qin Qinghuan at this time. Only when Your Majesty is in charge of the Snowdance Corps can we really deter the Dark World. Later, I will report to Zhongzhou State and elaborate on the problems we encounter today. Please don't have any concerns, Your Majesty. For the sake of Zhongzhou State, please go to the office of the president to preside over the overall situation. Qin Shinghuan's voice became more and more excited. This time he did not bend down. Instead, he gave an extremely standard military salute. Qin Shinghuan took a deep breath and looked at Qin Shinghuan's face. After a long time, he said slowly, "Does the Snowdance Corps know that you're coming?" "Yes, I've informed Deputy Marshal Drifting Cloud before. They may have some misunderstanding about me coming here, but everyone is doing everything for Zhongzhou State. Although I'm not talented enough, I can handle the daily affairs of the Snowdance Corps. At that time, please deter the invincible realm experts of other dark forces, Your Majesty." Wang Tianzong laughed. If he went to the office of the president, it would definitely be easy to invite him in but difficult to send him away. This was exactly the effect that Qin Shinghuan wanted. Once he took control of the Snowdance Corps and was by Wang Tianzong's side, it would be more than just the invincible realm experts of other dark forces who would be deterred. At that time, even if Li Tianlan woke up, not to mention that he was still seriously injured, even if he fully recovered, he would not be able to do anything. Wang Tianzong stood up and said calmly, "Lead the way. I'll go with you." This was definitely not a polite remark on the scene. This was Wang Tianzong's attitude. It represented Wang Tianzong's recognition of Qin Shinghuan's control of the Snowdance Corps. Qin Shinghuan was ecstatic. He turned around and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, please." He knew that after tonight, barring any mishaps, he would truly reach the pinnacle of his life. Not only would he attain a lofty status, he would also command his own legion. This was a completely different world from when he was still a high-ranking member of the North Sea Legion who was constantly being ostracized. The wind and rain outside were messy and cold. When Qin Shinghuan's military off-road vehicle stopped in the square in front of the office of the president, the elites of the Snowdance Corps who were temporarily stationed here, stopped the car without hesitation. "I'm Qin Shinghuan." Qin Shinghuan rolled down the window and said, "Your Vice Marshal." There was no anger in his tone. He just looked at the equally serious soldier with a serious face, nodded and said, "Strong wind and heavy rain, but you are loyal to your duty. Not bad. Although I was in Im before, I have heard of your deeds. You have fought for the prestige of the Snowdance Corps and won glory for the country. Good, very good." The soldier was completely unmoved. He said softly with a poker face, "Please show me your ID." Qin Shinghuan took out the ID and handed it to the soldier. Looking at the wind and rain outside the window, there was a flash of fire in his eyes. The ID of the Snowdance Corps was very special. It belonged to the standard style of the Special Warfare Army. There was no troop number, national emblem of Zhongzhou State, or anything that could represent the belonging and position of a soldier. There was only an extremely complicated steel seal with a code and the sword edge logo of the Snowdance Corps. It could not be imitated and it was easy to identify. The soldier of the Snowdance Corps looked at the national emblem seriously and frowned slightly. He might not understand the game and calculation of the upper level of the Snowdance Corps, but he was born in the Border Control Corps. As for the Vice Marshal of the Beihai Corps, he knew that the other party's position was not very consistent with his. But now that the ID was there, he had no reason not to let him go. After hesitating for a moment, he handed the ID to Qin Shinghuan and saluted. "Vice Marshal, please." Qin Shinghuan nodded with satisfaction. Suddenly he said casually, "How is Marshal Li?" "His Highness is fine." The soldier said expressionlessly. Qin Shinghuan drove with a smile, but a trace of gloom flashed in his eyes. The commander of the Snowdance Corps was the Marshal. The most proper form of address for Li Tianlan should be Marshal Li. But until now, Qin Shinghuan had never heard of the name Marshal Li in the Snowdance Corps. When everyone mentioned Li Tianlan, there was only one name. "Your Highness." What did this mean? The wind and rain are swift and violent. The green off-road vehicle drove into the square. After passing through several checkpoints along the way, it finally approached the gate of the presidential palace. Wang Tianzong, who had been silently observing all this along the way, suddenly said, "The Snowdance Corps is indeed a strong army." His tone was a little indifferent but also a little regretful. 3 years ago, the decisive battle of Tiandu and the border battle broke out one after another. Wang Tianzong went to the border in person. The first murderous weapon, human emperor, opened fire. The clear light illuminated the entire dark world. That battle was a deal between Wang Tianzong and the Dongqing clan. The attack of the human emperor was supposed to send the entire Thunderbolt battalion to Tiannan and hand it over to Dijiang. but in the end he only got half of it. But now half of it was given to Li Tianlan. This was a truly powerful army. Even the North Sea Legion, which was known as the most powerful legion in the world, didn't have many elite soldiers. Every time he thought of the tens of thousands of troops, Wang Qinzong felt that he had been schemed against. He even suspected that the Dongqing clan had calculated all this 3 years ago, so they used the Thunderbolt Battalion to exchange the human emperor's fire. Otherwise, today, with Wang Tianzong and the human emperor in hand, even if they were not the chosen one, what was there to be afraid of in the face of the so-called chaos? The off-road vehicle stopped at the gate of the presidential palace. Chen Qingwan personally held an umbrella for Wang Tianzong. When they were about to enter the door, a person came out in a hurry. He saw Wang Tianzong and Wang Tianzong also saw him. Both of them were slightly stunned. Going out? Wang Tianzong laughed and said in a gentle voice. Yes. Qin Shilai nodded and he became calmer. He had challenged Wang Tianzong 3 times and retreated unscathed 3 times. It seemed that he owed the Wang family of Beihai a great favor, but in fact the 2 sides had cooperated, and no one had treated the other badly. Now that the Qin clan was on Li Tianlan's side, the old affection had finally disappeared with the storm in Eastern Europe. Wang Tianzong nodded and didn't say much. The moment the 2 sides passed by, he frowned and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Qin Shilai seemed to be too calm when he saw him. At the same time, in the floating restaurant of the presidential palace, Li Tianlan and Holy Virgin Angel's dinner was coming to an end. Drifting Cloud hurried over and said with a solemn and excited look, "Your Highness, His Majesty Sword Emperor and Vice Marshal Chen are here." Li Tianlan nodded, picked up a snow-white square towel, wiped his mouth and suddenly laughed. Then closed the door. Chapter 480. The wind and rain fell. The thick and cold night enveloped the entire Reki city. The noise of the city gradually quieted down, and the roaring wind and rain seemed to be the only sound in the whole world. The rain fell in a hurry, wild and cold. In a medium-sized church in the west of Reki city, Arsis, the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, had just finished praying. He knelt on the ground and looked up at the cross above. His eyes flickered and no one knew what he was thinking. Behind Arsis was a mass of dark figures. The light in the church was extremely faint. The crowd in black almost merged with the darkness, which looked extremely strange. But everyone was kneeling and praying. In the silent atmosphere, the whole church was devout. Arsis stood up silently, walked to the door of the church, and looked at the rain under the night sky in silence. He suddenly felt that the night was incomparably oppressive, with a suffocating feeling that made it hard for him to breathe. Arsis frowned slightly and whispered, "I don't feel good." "You don't have to think too much." A voice sounded behind Arsis. Mellad, the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, walked over slowly and said respectfully, "I will take care of all this." Arsis narrowed his eyes and seemed to hesitate. "No matter what, it's much better than you doing it yourself," Mellad said calmly. Arsis had a secret that was not a secret. He was the 3rd on the divine list in the Dark World today and he used to be the 2nd. But whether he was the 3rd or the 2nd, his position didn't seem to be very stable. His innate talent was undoubtedly astonishing. However, no matter how amazing one's aptitude was, there would always be a limit. Trying his best to enter the peak of the invincible realm was Arisis's limit. He had a firm foothold in this realm, but he was no longer able to pursue the peak of the invincible realm. In the past few decades, the reason why he had been able to stay in the top 3 of the divine list was that, in addition to his own terrifying strength, the most important thing was the Pope's coronation. The coronation was similar to mental control or mental hypnosis. In the state of absolute concentration, the Pope's coronation could stimulate a person's will to the greatest extent, so that the person's will, reaction speed and other comprehensive qualities could be improved a little. This improvement was almost meaningless to experts in the ice-condensing realm and the fire-flaming realm. But for experts at the half-step invincible realm and the peak of the invincible realm, the improvement was great. This small increment often meant a whole new world. After the coronation, Arsis had the strength of the top 3 or even the top 2 on the divine list. However, the coronation was not permanent. Such an upgrade would also consume energy. The coronation of the Pope could probably support Arsis for 3 all-out battles. After 3 times, he would fall into a period of weakness due to excessive mental exhaustion. In other words, Arsis, who was in Eastern Europe but had never made a move, was his true peak state. Li Tianlan asked Arsis to take action tonight. In addition to taking care of Eris's dignity, the main reason why Saintess Angel was in a dilemma was because of this. If Arsis didn't make a move, Mellad and the 100 Saint warriors would. But as the time approached, the uneasiness in Eris's heart grew stronger. His character was originally extremely decisive, but at this time he hesitated. The Holy Disarmament Corps brought by Arsis was not small. But what Li Tianlan wanted were elites. This kind of deal had never been faked. The other party wanted elites. If ordinary warriors were sent out, even a thunder-shocking realm expert could see that something was wrong, not to mention deceiving Li Tianlan. Therefore, those who were about to set off with Mellad were the real elites of the Holy Disarmament Corps. If things didn't go well tonight, once these people were killed, it would definitely be a loss that could not be ignored for the Vatican. Arsis would also lose a considerable part of the super combat force that could be used in Eastern Europe. Is Li Tianlan trustworthy? Arsis suddenly asked. He has no reason not to cooperate with us. Mellad said softly, the Vatican is not hostile to Zhongzhou state. What we want is theocracy, and what he wants is military power. In a short time he needs us to help him consolidate his position in Wulan state in terms of faith. And we also need to use his power to spread faith. From this point of view he is trustworthy. What about from other aspects? Arsis said quietly. From other aspects, it was naturally whether Li Tianlan could defend Wulan state. Wulan state now belonged to the Snowdance Corps. No one denied this. And what the dark forces wanted to do now was to overthrow this fact. If Li Tianlan got Wulan state and could defend it, then Wulan state would truly belong to him. Mellad thought for a moment. He said calmly, let's see tonight. Arsis was silent for a long time. After a long time he whispered, it's too sudden. Mellad smiled and didn't say anything. Li Tianlan had just woken up today. As soon as he figured out the situation, he took advantage of the situation to make this move. There was an element of coincidence in it, but he also appreciated the decisiveness of the young highness very much. Be careful on the way, Arsis ordered. Mellad bowed and responded. When he straightened up, Eris's figure had disappeared from his sight. Mellad turned around slowly. The 100 Saint warriors in the church had finished praying. This might be the last time many people prayed in this life. Magical faith. Mellad sighed with emotion in his heart, but his expression was still solemn. He waved his hand and said calmly, let's go. Our destination is the Caesar Hotel. The darkness was as dark as ink. In the magnificent suite of the Caesar Hotel, King Tong stood in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling window and looked out of the window at the never-ending wind and rain in the night. She felt a little uneasy for no reason. Poppy, who was reporting the recent situation of the Shadow Throne, saw her unconsciously. So when she finished her report, he finally couldn't help asking, Your Highness, is there something on your mind? King Tong raised her eyebrows, and a trace of confusion flashed in her eyes. Poppy looked at King Tong with concern. He looked a little nervous. It's okay. King Tong took a deep breath and said quietly, Is everything arranged? Everything is ready. Poppy smiled. King Tong nodded. Wang Tianzong said that he had waited for Qin Shi Huang for 2 days. In fact, this sentence was equivalent to saying that the Shadow Throne and the Wang family of Beihai had waited for Qin Shi Huang for 2 days. The 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan state were a large area of interest that was enough to make everyone go crazy. The Wang family of Beihai would not give up, nor would the Shadow Throne. But Li Tianlan took the lead. From Wang Tianzong's standpoint, Zhongzhou state was watching him, so he wanted to get the 5 Eastern European countries. He had to take down the Snowdance Corps first. The arrival of Qin Shi Huang was the key for the Wang family of Beihai to take down the Snowdance Corps. Wang Tianzong and Qin Shi Huang had left. Tyrant had been found. The indefinite grace was on the way. The Shadow Throne was preparing. Li Tianlan was in a coma. Everything was ready. Was there anything more perfect than this? Wang Tianzong started to work tonight. The Shadow Throne also had to start to work. When everything broke out, the Wang family of Beihai and the Shadow Throne had to create a favorable situation for themselves as soon as possible. Wait for the accurate news from His Majesty the Sword Emperor. King Tong's tone was calm, but she clenched her fists subconsciously. Calmness often represented confidence. And confidence represented fearlessness at any time. Qin Shilai was fearless. Wang Tianzong could clearly see the indifference and calmness in Qin Shilai's eyes. He suddenly felt a little weird. The office of the president was solemn and quiet. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and looked around. The rain made the lights of the office of the president dim. The patrol team of the Snowdance Corps was quietly patrolling in the office of the president. Everything was normal. Wang Tianzong's footsteps paused subconsciously. "Your Majesty?" Qin Shenghuan looked back at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong looked at his expression carefully, nodded and said calmly, "Let's go." The two of them went straight to the conference room. Qin Shenghuan believed that the news that he had entered the office of the president had spread. It was the best choice to go to the conference room now. The door of the conference room was right in front of him. Qin Shenghuan took a deep breath. His eyes were red, and his whole body was full of undisguised excitement. Pushing open the door, what greeted him was the real peak of his life. Qin Shenghuan's palm trembled, and he forced himself to calm down and pushed the door open. The spacious conference room was full of people. It seemed to be a respect for him, the vice-marshal. Qin Shenghuan nodded with satisfaction and instinctively looked at the position where he should sit. The main seat. There was a young man on the main seat who was also looking at him with a smile. Qin Shenghuan suddenly blinked his eyes and shook his head. His face turned pale in an instant, and his eyes turned to drifting cloud with some resentment. Li Tianlan? How could it be Li Tianlan? From the spirit that Li Tianlan showed, Qin Shenghuan could be sure that Li Tianlan's combat capability had been restored perfectly. But how could all this be possible? Marshal Li? Qin Shenghuan lost his composure and exclaimed under the agitation. A strange light suddenly flashed in Wang Tianzong's eyes, and his brows furrowed more and more silently. "Who asked you to come?" Li Tianlan looked at Qin Shenghuan and asked with a smile, holding his cheeks. "I." Qin Shenghuan opened his mouth. Sword Emperor was behind him. But in a short time Qin Shenghuan broke out in a cold sweat. "Your Highness has been unconscious." Qin Shenghuan also called Li Tianlan Your Highness in nervousness. "I'm sitting here and you say that I'm unconscious. Are you blind?" Li Tianlan's voice grew softer. Qin Shenghuan's face turned livid for a moment. He lowered his head and remained silent. He really didn't know that Li Tianlan had woken up. In fact, from the second he saw Li Tianlan sitting here, his whole mind had been completely blank. "I remember I said that if I let you stay in you either carry out the order or I will carry out the military law, right?" Li Tianlan looked at Qin Shenghuan for a while and suddenly said. A great sense of crisis suddenly enveloped them. Qin Shenghuan trembled all over. He turned around instinctively and shouted, "Your Majesty, save!" Li Tianlan suddenly clenched his fists. In an instant, countless sword intents surged from all directions in the conference room, all rushing to Qin Shenghuan. Wang Tianzong put his palm on Qin Shenghuan's shoulder. Silently, all the sword intents in the conference room had completely disappeared. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong coldly. "Marshal Li has just woken up. Why are you so angry?" Wang Tianzong said calmly. "I'm not angry," Li Tianlan said blandly. His voice was getting louder and louder. "You call me Marshal Li, so you should know my identity. I'm the commander of the Snowdance Corps. My words are the military order in the Snowdance Corps." His loud voice came out of the conference room and echoed between heaven and earth. It was extremely loud and dignified. "Now Vice-Marshal Qin Shenghuan has disobeyed my military order. What should I do?" There was a moment of silence. In the next second, a majestic and sonorous voice suddenly rang out. Loud noises converged from all directions, forming a torrent of sound. The voice spread throughout the office of the president. The wind and rain were turbulent, and the world was shaking with an invincible power. Li Tianlan's voice spread outside the office of the president. In response to him was the roar of tens of thousands of elite soldiers of the Snowdance Corps with all their might. What should he do if he disobeyed the order? Die. Chapter 481. Every force in the Dark World had a relatively mature base in Reki City. This kind of base was not to deal with Li Tianlan, but for Reki City and Wulan State. Wulan State was not the strongest in Europe, and it was not even a first-tier power. However, the geographical location of this country was definitely the most delicate. Occupying this place was tantamount to controlling the throat of Eastern Europe and Western Europe. The huge benefits represented behind it were enough to make any force in any country drool. There were many similar places all over the world. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had always been extremely sensitive to foreign forces, but there were also strongholds of various forces inside Zhongzhou State, but they were not large. Other than that, there were strongholds of major forces in every important place in the world, such as Federal City in Gotham and Star Nation, England's Fog City, and so on. Although the status of Reki City was not as important as that of the major international cities, from the perspective of interests, it was more important than any international city. The whole of Europe was at stake here. So it was no exaggeration to say that almost as long as the major forces existed, their bases in Reki City would last. The base of the Heroes Club in Reki City was very obvious. Towering in the center of the city, the Hero Building and the iconic forest emblem on the building were the most representative symbols they left here. The Hero Building could be said to be one of the tallest buildings in Reki City. As a super-large comprehensive office building, there were nearly 70 different companies operating at the same time. The Hero Group alone occupied the top 4 floors of the building, overlooking the entire Reki City day and night. The president of the Heroes Club had been living here since he arrived in Reki City. The top floor of the Hero Building had become his personal space. After arriving in Reki City, he rarely gave any clear orders. Most of the time he stayed quietly on the top floor of the Hero Building, observing the situation in Eastern Europe or meditating. The people in the Hero Building almost never bothered their president. The most spacious and luxurious office on the top floor had become the forbidden area of the entire building. The forbidden area meant that almost no one could get close to it. Therefore, when the president of the Heroes Club saw the envelope that suddenly appeared on the table, he was extremely surprised. The content of the letter was very simple. There was only one time and one badge. A throne surrounded by light gray wings was imprinted on the paper, vivid and lifelike. Below the badge there was a time. August 27th. Today was August 27th. The president of the Heroes Club looked at the simple but complicated letter in his hand. He had been silent for nearly half an hour. The soft light shone on the paper, and the snow-white paper was dyed slightly yellow. The yellowish letter had an incomparably bright and brilliant color on it. It was a red line. It was as if someone had intentionally or unintentionally scratched a line on the paper. And this red line happened to fall on the badge of the Shadow Throne. This red line had a completely different feeling from the entire letter. It seemed to be written casually, but in the eyes of the president of the Heroes Club, he subconsciously narrowed his eyes. The red line was straight and swift. The president lowered his head and stared at the letter. Wherever the red lines passed, all he could see was dominance and sharpness. Vaguely, he seemed to understand the meaning of the letter, and his eyes flashed with a hint of excitement. "Your Highness Charlemagne," a voice with a strange rhythm suddenly rang out. The voice was soft and quiet without any impurities. It was extremely comfortable to listen to. The Hero Guild Master raised his head, threw the letter away and asked, "What do you think?" A slender and soft hand reached out and caught the letter. The soft light shone on the hand, emitting a delicate and charming halo. But the other party's whole body was blurred. The world was extremely real, but the other party seemed to be standing in the void. Even the light was swallowed up by the gloomy void. The blurry and flickering figure could not be identified as a man or a woman. He looked down at the letter in his hand and frowned faintly. "Who wants to eradicate the Shadow Throne? To be exact, I want to drive the Shadow Throne out of Eastern Europe." President Charlemagne's tone was full of depth. "But the Shadow Throne has invested a lot in Eastern Europe." He put the letter back on the table and said softly, "So?" Charlemagne laughed. His smile was cold, but his eyes were full of fire. "I'm a little tempted." The Shadow Throne had invested a lot in Eastern Europe this time. Queen King Tong was at the Caesar Hotel. The entire Caesar Hotel was filled with people from the Shadow Throne. And this did not include the base they had established in Eastern Europe. If they could catch all these people tonight, especially King Tong, if she also died here, the Shadow Throne, which had suffered a great loss of vitality, would probably become the next Polar Ground Alliance the next day. The relationship between the Heroes Club and the Wang family of Beihai was very bad. The death of the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai had a lot to do with the Heroes Club. Could be said to be a feud. The reason why the relationship between the Heroes Club and the Wang family of Beihai was so stiff was largely because of the Shadow Throne. "This may be the best chance to defeat the Shadow Throne," Charlemagne said, "but I'm not sure if this is a trap or a cooperation. Mitchell, I need your advice." "Who wrote the letter?" Mitchell asked after a moment of silence. "There is Li Tianlan's sword intent in the letter. The channel should be from the Samsara Palace," Charlemagne said faintly. He suddenly laughed. I've long heard that the intelligence system of the Samsara Palace is very terrifying, but I didn't expect it to be so terrifying. This letter can appear around me without anyone noticing, even you. I think we should check which people around us are pawns of the Samsara Palace. Now is not the time. Mitchell thought for a moment and shook his head. The other party is demonstrating. It's really not the time. Charlemagne patted the letter on the table. The most important thing is tonight. Are you sure it's Li Tianlan? Mitchell seemed to be murmuring to himself. The sword intent. It's very similar. But I haven't seen him fight in front of me, so I can't be absolutely sure. Charlemagne said slowly. Mitchell fell silent. After a long time he slowly said, we can be sure that there is a deep conflict between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Even from the news we received, Li Tianlan will face a great survival crisis in Eastern Europe, and most of the crisis comes from Wang Tianzong. So it's logical that he wants to borrow strength to destroy the Shadow Throne. As for us, we didn't have much resentment with Li Tianlan before. The Heroes Club should not be the first target that Li Tianlan wants to deal with. Tonight will be an opportunity to make the Shadow Throne suffer heavy losses. Li Tianlan needs to borrow strength. In other words, he needs our strength to have the confidence to hit the Shadow Throne hard. Maybe it's not just our strength. Since he wants to borrow strength, why not borrow all of it? I'm afraid that all the forces have received similar letters by now, right? Charlemagne said lightly. In that case we have nothing to worry about. Mitchell said. Charlemagne raised his eyebrows. Do you mean that we should get involved? You stay. Mitchell said, I'll go. Charlemagne was silent for a moment. Worried? Mitchell laughed. What are you talking about? Charlemagne shook his head with a smile. It's just your realm. Everyone knew that the president of the Heroes Club was very powerful. But it was also well known that the president of the Heroes Club was the only invincible realm expert. No one knew that Mitchell, who did not hold any position in the Heroes Club, had recently broken through to the invincible realm. He was a new invincible realm expert in the Dark World. Only Mitchell and Charlemagne knew about this. This was also the biggest trump card of the Heroes Club. Even if we don't expose our strength, it's not a problem to protect ourselves. Tonight's trip, the principle of the Heroes Club is to add icing on the cake, not to provide timely help. Charlemagne was silent for a moment and finally nodded. Mitchell turned around slowly. I don't like the name of the Heroes Group. Charlemagne suddenly said, if we can succeed in the trip to Eastern Europe, the Heroes Club will still be the Heroes Club. How about changing the name of the Heroes Group? Mitchell's body froze. Change what name? He asked. Habsburg Group. Charlemagne said blandly. Mitchell turned around slowly. The president of the Heroes Club had never had a surname. But as Charlemagne's confidant for many years, Mitchell naturally knew what Charlemagne's surname was. Habsburg. That was Charlemagne's surname. The most important thing was that it was not a South American surname. It was a surname of the Germanic Empire in Europe. In some ancient times, the surname Habsburg almost represented the history of the Germanic Empire to some extent. However, now this surname had become a surname that neither of the two major forces in Europe was willing to mention. The Vatican did not like to hear this surname. Rothschild did not like it either. Therefore the Heroes Club did not like the Vatican or Rothschild. Tonight, you not only want to kill King Tong but also want to inflict serious damage on the Vatican? Mitchell turned to look at Charlemagne and asked. Once Arcis is dead I can. Charlemagne said calmly. But Li Tianlan has cooperation with the Vatican. Tonight? Mitchell frowned. Arcis probably won't take action tonight, so we won't have too much conflict with the Vatican. As for the future? Charlemagne laughed. Li Tianlan can cooperate with the Vatican, but we can cooperate with tribulation. Tribulation. Mitchell raised his eyebrows. In the past 3 years, there had only been 2 newly advanced invincible realm experts in the Dark World. One was him. The other was Tribulation, who had broken through in the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago. Mitchell knew the name Tribulation, but at this time he couldn't help but confirm it. Sai City? Charlemagne suddenly burst out laughing. He laughed for a long time before he stood up and walked to the window. Looking down at Reki City in the wind and rain, he whispered, I know a secret. This is the first half of the chapter. I feel uncomfortable all over and have a fever of more than 38 degrees. Every time the season changes I must catch a cold. This has really become a routine. Chapter 482. Wang Tianzong heard the response of the snow dance corps. Reki City was not big. The roar of tens of thousands of people in unison was like thunder. With an overwhelming power, it swept through the whole city in an instant. Everyone in the city heard the response of the snow dance corps. In the room on the top floor of the Hero Building, President Charlemagne looked in the direction of the presidential palace. The wind and rain in the city were chaotic. However, the deafening roar continued to reverberate with a buzzing sound. A row of black motorcades slowly drove out of the Hero's building. Charlemagne looked on quietly and his expression grew calmer. West City Church. In the middle building, Arcis also heard the roar of the snow dance corps. He didn't understand Chinese. However, one could clearly sense the naked killing intent in this earth-shattering voice. Arcis thought of tonight's plan, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. His smile was happy and satisfied. The plan had already begun. Moreover, Li Tianlan was credible. East of the city. Star State Embassy. Cass Rotter, the leader of the Men in Black, known as the top master in North America, had also received the same letter as President Charlemagne. He lowered his head and stared at the envelope. In the direction of the office of the president, a voice like a tsunami passed through the wind and rain. On the envelope, the red line streaked across the emblem of the Shadow Throne, and it seemed to become more and more fierce. Cass Rotter suddenly stood up. "Your Highness." A burly man from Star State walked over and said respectfully, "Contact Huan Kong." Castro said calmly, "Fantasy World and Men in Black attack together. Target, Caesar Hotel." Snow Country. Mormons. In the basement, Qin Weibai slowly walked out with a pale and tired face. When she passed by the most flowering garden in the manor, she saw Tribulation standing in the flowers for the first time. Tribulation stood under a cherry tree and looked at Qin Weibai calmly. "Martial uncle likes cherry blossoms?" Qin Weibai asked knowingly with a smile. She kept calling him Uncle Master Jia. Of course this was how Li Tianlan addressed him. Tribulation was silent for a while. No one knew what he was thinking of, but his eyes were in a trance. Then he remembered the business, shook his head and said, "There's a change in Reki City." Qin Weibai's voice was clear and light. She never seemed to be flustered or anxious. No matter what the situation was, she was always as calm as still water. She was indifferent, calm, elegant and perfect. Tribulation handed a fax in his hand to Qin Weibai. "This is the information from a man named Gandalf. He seems to be the person in charge of your intelligence in Reki City," Tribulation said. Qin Weibai took the fax and quickly looked down at it. Then he read it again carefully. The content of the fax was very short and concise. Qin Weibai read it twice to make sure that she did not miss anything. Then she chuckled. She was really beautiful. That kind of perfection that couldn't be described with any beautiful words had a kind of dreamy coldness and elegance. Along with her smile, the entire night sky seemed to become incomparably brilliant. Tribulation froze for a moment. She had never expected Qin Weibai to react like this. He was not from the Samsara Palace. But Qin Weibai was not on guard against him, so he could see the faxed information from Reki City. Strictly speaking, Li Tianlan's plan tonight actually conflicted with Qin Weibai's plan in many places. It would also mess up Qin Weibai's arrangement. Qin Weibai might not be angry and complain to Li Tianlan, but she should at least show some concern about her future plans. But now, Qin Weibai was really happy. "Are you happy?" Tribulation was a little confused. "Why wouldn't I be happy?" Qin Weibai chuckled and said softly, "My man is becoming more and more mature, strong and independent. He has gradually integrated into the general trend of the dark world and began to take advantage of it. He has his own plan and is working hard for it. I'm his woman. Shouldn't I be happy?" "But he messed up your plan," Tribulation said. "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded. "But those plans were originally for him. Now he has his own direction of action. As for my plan, I can modify it. I think many people are mistaken. Everything I do is for him, not what he has to do according to my plan. He is my man, not a vassal. On the contrary, the real situation is that I should take him as the master. His current plan is feasible. In that case, why should I be unhappy? But if he cooperates your plan, I'm cooperating with him," Qin Weibai said, "all the time." "You're too sensitive." Tribulation was silent for a while and said, "Do you think, Martial Uncle, you think too much?" Qin Weibai looked at Tribulation with soft eyes. "I'm not so sensitive. I care about Tianlan's emotions, but I care more about his future. His plan is indeed feasible, so I'm willing to cooperate with him to modify my plan instead of letting him cooperate with me. Now Tianlan is becoming more and more mature. I just want to tell him in advance that maybe he is carrying a lot of things such as the Samsara Palace, the Li family, Sai City, and the Dongqing clan. But no matter how much he carries, he is still himself. Tribulation frowned. There were too many meanings in Qin Weibai's words, so he didn't understand what Qin Weibai meant. If he didn't understand, he wouldn't think about it for the time being. Tribulation asked directly, "How are you going to modify your plan?" Qin Weibai was silent for a long time. She looked at Tribulation with respect in her eyes, but more of imperceptible sympathy and pity. "Now," she whispered, "let's go to Reki City." The earth-shattering roar finally passed. But the entire office of the president seemed to be trembling in the huge sound waves. Wang Tianzong was silent. Chen Qinghuan's whole body was shaking uncontrollably. From the first time he saw Li Tianlan, he already knew that he would lose. He did have Wang Tianzong by his side now. Wang Tianzong also supported him to take control of the Snowdance Corps and make Li Tianlan a mere figurehead. But all that was under the condition that Li Tianlan was not awake. Now Li Tianlan was awake. Li Tianlan wanted to kill him. The Snowdance Corps also wanted to kill him. What would Wang Tianzong choose? The most fatal thing was that Chen Qinghuan knew very well that he was not Wang Tianzong's confidant. Wang Tianzong had no reason to protect him. Now his only hope of survival depended on whether Wang Tianzong really thought that he, as a chess piece, was useful enough. Wang Tianzong seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. Protecting Chen Qinghuan was tantamount to preserving the hope of the Wang family of Beihai to continue to get involved in the Snowdance Corps in the future. If he didn't protect Chen Qinghuan from his standpoint, in addition to needing more energy to control Li Tianlan in the future, the only loss he would suffer was his face. Now he was about to break through. If he broke through successfully, it really didn't matter whether Chen Qinghuan was in the Snowdance Corps or not. And if he died, it would be Wang Qinglei's loss. It had nothing to do with him. But was the Sword Emperor's face worthless? Wang Tianzong looked up at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood in front of him with a cold face. In this state, Li Tianlan exuded an almost invincible momentum from head to toe. The essence, qi and spirit of the entire Snowdance Corps seemed to have been completely integrated with him. Such a Li Tianlan was terrible. It was not his strength that was terrible. It was his fearless sharpness at this moment. "Do you want to kill your main deputy?" Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. "I'm just executing military law." Li Tianlan took a step forward. "I want to protect him." Wang Tianzong said word by word. "No." Li Tianlan's answer was resolute. As he spoke, he took a second step forward. "Not everyone is qualified to attack my Snowdance Corps. I respect you as the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. I will pretend that what happened tonight never happened. I can also ignore the purpose of your coming here tonight. But Chen Qinghuan doesn't obey military orders. If I want him to die tonight, he must die." The silver light flickered slightly. Falling stars appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. The silver blade was cold and sharp. Li Tianlan took the fourth step and said calmly, "I'll see who dares to stop me." The void distorted imperceptibly. A dazzling beam of light suddenly lit up in front of Chen Qinghuan. The beam of light illuminated the night, evaporated the wind and rain, and directly blocked Chen Qinghuan behind it. Wang Tianzong's eyes became completely cold, with an undisguised hidden anger. "Try to kill me?" His tone was indifferent. All of a sudden Li Tianlan laughed wildly. The silver sword light gathered in his hand. At this moment, Li Tianlan gave up all his defense and exposed his body to Wang Tianzong's sword intent. His posture was indescribably wild. "Try to kill me?" His voice was impassioned. He suddenly sped up and walked directly to Chen Qinghuan. The distance between the two was only dozens of meters. Li Tianlan gave up all his defense and strode forward. Wang Tianzong's sword intent was there. As long as he entered the range of the sword intent within 10 meters, Li Tianlan would definitely die. Everyone knew this. But Li Tianlan walked over without flinching. Wang Tianzong stared at Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan's eyes were as hot as a burning wildfire. His pace was getting faster and faster. 20 meters. 15 meters. 12 meters. Without any defense or retreat, he moved forward all the way. 11 meters. Facing the death line that was enough to kill him in an instant, Li Tianlan did not hesitate and stepped forward. The moment his foot was about to fall, Wang Tianzong's sword intent quietly retreated half a meter. At the same time, Li Tianlan stepped forward again. A drop of sweat flowed down Wang Tianzong's temple and was instantly evaporated. The sword intent kept retreating. Li Tianlan moved forward all the way. Chen Qinghuan's whole body was trembling violently. Boom! There was a sudden roar in the night sky in the distance. The night full of wind and rain was illuminated for a moment. A long tail flame directly traversed the night sky. Then there was an earth-shattering explosion and fire. Wang Tianzong suddenly turned around and looked at the place where the explosion sounded. The silver sword intent behind him suddenly exploded, accompanied by Chen Qinghuan's desperate scream. The blood rain flew and fell to the ground, and was washed away by the rain. Wang Tianzong still did not look back. Deafening explosions rang out incessantly, and the roars lingered on endlessly. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time, then slowly turned around, looked at Li Tianlan and said word by word, "Caesar Hotel?" "Caesar Hotel." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. The Caesar Hotel was full of people from the Shadow Throne. It was also Wang Tianzong's most important ally at this time. Li Tianlan predicted that Chen Qinghuan would bring Wang Tianzong here, so he directly sent someone to attack the Caesar Hotel? A cold killing intent gradually filled Wang Tianzong's eyes. He nodded slowly and said, "Good, very good, but do you think it's too late?" "I think it's too late." Li Tianlan put away the sword edge. Chen Qinghuan had become a corpse in front of him. But Wang Tianzong had no time to care about this. In the continuous explosion he turned directly to the door. Li Tianlan's slow voice sounded behind him, sounding extremely gloomy. "Your Majesty, please wait." Chapter 483. The disaster came all of a sudden. On the night of August 17th, in the cold wind and rain, the Caesar Hotel, which had been calm and luxurious a second ago, burst into flames without warning. With a sharp whistling sound, the cannonball broke through the air, and the long tail flame became the most brilliant light in the night sky. The whole Caesar Hotel was shaking and shaking. The raging fire swept through the whole hotel and was extinguished by the rain, turning into black smoke. The thick and suffocating smoke and dust poured into the hotel along the broken glass. With the hotel as the center, the power of the whole neighborhood was completely cut off. In a short time before the hotel's generator was started, the whole Caesar Hotel became completely chaotic. King Tong, who had just laid down and not fallen asleep, got up and rushed to the window as fast as she could. The entire night sky was almost completely lit up. Shells rained down one after another with an unreasonable momentum. The tail flames were burning. Under the rainy sky, it was as if stars were falling crazily. Amidst the deafening roar, a corner of the luxurious Caesar Hotel was blasted into pieces. Countless stones fell down. Flames and smoke rose in the air. The sound of the stairs cracking could be heard continuously. It was so dense that it was impossible to hear it. In the distance, the neighborhood near Reki City had become an ocean. An ocean of people. A sea of people. Densely packed armies rushed out from every corner. Armored vehicles and even main battle tanks swaggered through the streets. In the distant streets and alleys, trucks transporting soldiers moved forward with indomitable will. Accompanied by artillery fire dancing in the night sky, the entire Caesar Hotel was like a target in the enemy's artillery fire. It was bombarded until it was on the verge of collapse. King Tong's face instantly turned pale. Reki City might now have gathered all the super forces in the Dark World. But there was only one force that could openly use cannonballs, armored vehicles, main battle tanks, and troops to wipe out the enemy. Only the government of Wulan State. And now there was only one person who could order the government of Wulan State. Li Tianlan. King Tong gritted her teeth and suddenly screamed. "Phew!" An extremely shrill voice appeared in King Tong's sight with an incomparably brilliant light. The light, which seemed to be the color of death, carried an unparalleled aura of danger, and instantly occupied all of King Tong's consciousness. King Tong's pupils suddenly contracted, and she screamed with all her might, "Rush out! Leave the hotel!" The incomparably brilliant light in his line of sight suddenly grew larger. The blazing temperature evaporated the wind and rain, and it crashed into the center of the hotel. The entire space suddenly fluctuated, and the huge impact formed a visible airwave. The flames rushed up, and in the loud explosion the entire hotel kept collapsing. The walls, glass, furniture, steel, the sound of the explosion was earth-shattering. The Caesar Hotel, which had stood in Reki City for many years, completely collapsed. Billowing black smoke and thick smoke and dust flew into the sky, and large pieces of stones fell down like the end of the world. King Tong's figure was also falling. Countless broken stones almost drowned her. She was still able to maintain her balance, and all the boulders that approached her were shattered into powder. The rumbling of the collapsing hotel continued. In the thick smoke and dust, flashes of lightning appeared one after another. There were a lot of thunderbolts. But King Tong's heart kept sinking. The entire Caesar Hotel was filled with people from the Shadow Throne. Even the waiters were the same. This shot had completely destroyed the entire Caesar Hotel, and there would not even be any accidental deaths. Now there were still many survivors. Compared with the number of people from the Shadow Throne in the Caesar Hotel, the number made King Tong's whole body twitch. She remembered the meeting with Li Tianlan that day. She thought of his eyes. Indifferent, calm, cruel, and vicious. The wind and rain fell on her through the smoke and dust. King Tong suddenly felt that the midsummer in Eastern Europe was really cold. It was so cold that even though she was the queen of the Shadow Throne, she saw the huge shadow on the road ahead at this time. A few spots of light seemed to light up in the huge shadow. The spots of light quickly drew closer. A squadron of fighter jets approached quickly. The perfect streamlined shape of the fighter jets looked extremely strange and cold. King Tong opened her domain with all her strength. The moment the domain spread, the fighter jets, which had become clear, suddenly opened fire. The intensive sound of the machine guns rang out without interruption in the explosion and the loud sound of falling. In an instant, the whole night sky seemed to be sparkling with sparks. The sparks were swift and fierce, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. It was completely like a rainstorm. Tens of thousands of bullets desperately swept the ruins of the Caesar Hotel. Blood and screams echoed in the ruins. Outside the ruins of the hotel, the army was pressing on. There was no room for any of this. Kill them all. Please stay, Your Majesty. Li Tianlan's voice was very light, but it was extremely gloomy. As his voice rang out, footsteps could be heard all around the courtyard of the presidential palace. Please stay, Your Majesty. Cool breeze and drifting cloud appeared in the east. Please stay, Your Majesty. Li Zhonghu and Sun Mengran appeared in the west. Please stay, Your Majesty. Hua Qingfeng, the sect leader of the Shadow Sect, appeared in the south. Please stay, Your Majesty. Li Wangxing, the Lieutenant General of 9 regions, appeared in the north. More and more people appeared in different positions. Dozens of people, hundreds of people were densely packed. Everyone completely surrounded the courtyard, including Wang Tianzong. Please stay, Your Majesty. This was everyone's voice. Wang Tianzong frowned tightly. The explosions kept ringing in the distance. The huge roar was like the thunder that swept through the whole city. Tonight, Reki City was in turmoil again. Wang Tianzong looked in the direction of the Caesar Hotel. He saw the shells whistling in the night sky. He saw the fighter planes hovering in the night sky. The smell of gunpowder seemed to have spread over, and the aura of killing and death was looming. Wang Tianzong slowly turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes were calm. But his calm coat seemed to be gradually falling off. In this state, Wang Tianzong seemed to have completely turned into a sword with shocking sharpness. Li Tianlan looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes. His eyes were calm too. He was calm all over. Calm, tranquil, and far away. You won't let me go? Wang Tianzong asked. The Caesar Hotel was less than a few kilometers away from him. In the Caesar Hotel, his most important ally was being attacked and even slaughtered. He attacked a superpower with absolute military force. What was more fatal was that all the people of the Shadow Throne were still gathered together. Wang Tianzong didn't even dare to imagine the ending of the Shadow Throne tonight. Please stay, Your Majesty. Li Tianlan said softly. Chen Qinghuan's body fell at his feet, and the blood was still flowing. He seemed to have completely calmed down, and there was no longer any aggressiveness. If Your Majesty is willing to do me the honor, how about I invite Your Majesty to have a cup of tea? Who is in the Caesar Hotel? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. As soon as he asked this question, he thought of the scene in front of the door. Qin Shilai? Only Prime Minister Rieker could command the army. Rieker was Li Tianlan's man. Everything in the Caesar Hotel must be Li Tianlan's doing. This was something that Li Tianlan himself admitted. Qin Shilai had just gone out. At this time he should be close to the Caesar Hotel. There was no doubt that this dark sword master, who had the strength to enter the divine list, would be the most important force to contain King Tong. I don't know. Li Tianlan said softly, I only know that Reki City is not peaceful tonight, so I have given an order in advance. No one, including myself, is allowed to enter tonight and not leave. It's not against your majesty, but I need to be responsible for Zhongzhou state. Wang Qianzong sneered, and his voice suddenly became stern. The Shadow Throne is Zhongzhou state's partner. Li Tianlan, are you killing Zhongzhou state's ally now? Zhongzhou state's partner? Li Tianlan's voice became cold. Your Majesty, you seem to have forgotten your position. Ask yourself, do you stand here on behalf of Beihai or Zhongzhou state? What does it mean for me to stand here? Between you and me, who can better represent Zhongzhou state? He suddenly turned around, walked to his bedroom and said coldly, Ally? I've been in Eastern Europe for a few days, but I've never seen the so-called cooperation agreement between Zhongzhou state and the Shadow Throne. Where did the ally come from? Is the Shadow Throne an ally of Zhongzhou state or of you, Wang Qianzong? Have you already formed an alliance with the Shadow Throne on behalf of Zhongzhou state? Your Majesty, do you really have this qualification? Wang Qianzong looked at Li Tianlan's back as he left. At this moment, his expression was still calm, but his heart was already surging wildly. He finally found that he had done something wrong. Li Tianlan was very young. His realm was very low. His combat capability was ordinary. Wang Qianzong called him Marshal Li, but deep down in his heart, he had never thought much of Li Tianlan. Eastern Europe was in chaos. He forced Li Tianlan to come to Eastern Europe. Then he killed him. Everything was over. That was what Wang Qianzong thought from beginning to end. But at this moment he realized how subtle Li Tianlan's identity as a marshal was. He stood on the side of the general trend. He was a marshal. No matter how young he was, at least in Eastern Europe, he was qualified to be his opponent. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Wang Qianzong raised his eyebrows gradually. Li Tianlan paused and turned to look at Wang Qianzong. I don't believe it, he said. At this moment Wang Qianzong really felt his anger. He looked at Li Tianlan and then around. The entire office of the president had been under martial law. In the current situation, it was not Li Tianlan who asked him to stay. It was the entire Snowdance Corps who asked him to stay. If Wang Qianzong broke in, the entire Snowdance Corps would fight to keep him here. Wang Qianzong thought that he could go out. But if things got to that point, how could the Wang family of Beihai live in Zhongzhou state? This was the general trend. Li Tianlan stood in the general trend and suppressed people with his power. Even though Wang Qianzong was the Sword Emperor, he had to weigh it. He couldn't kill Li Tianlan for the Shadow Throne. Nor could he break out of the encirclement and fight against the Snowdance Corps for the Shadow Throne. This was the most basic principle and bottom line. If Wang Qianzong moved, he would commit treason tonight. Is this considered luring the tiger away from the mountain? Wang Qianzong suddenly asked. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said nothing. But are you sure you can succeed tonight? There was a flash of mockery in Wang Qianzong's eyes. He was here, which meant that Li Tianlan temporarily imprisoned him here with the general trend. But it didn't mean that he couldn't do anything else. Wang Qianzong took out a very small instrument from his arms and pressed the button. The colorful lights on the button kept flashing. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at the instrument in Wang Qianzong's hand. Wang Qianzong directly threw the instrument in his hand over and said flatly, "Have you ever seen this thing?" Li Tianlan reached out to take it and looked down at the instrument in front of him. The instrument barrel was dark and there was a devil's head painted on it. Li Tianlan had never seen such a thing. But he knew that it was definitely one of Wang Qianzong's backup plans. He casually threw the instrument to Wang Qianzong, then took out a medal from his arms and threw it to Wang Qianzong. "Have you ever seen this thing?" Li Tianlan calmly asked the same question as Wang Qianzong. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.